Hi, welcome back guys. This is your friend, the Iron Fanfics, back with amazing fanfiction. This is the series of What If Deku Had Time Rewind Quirk. Now before starting, please give this video a like and subscribe to the channel if you want more videos like this. Now let's get into the fanfic. Midoryia Izuku stared down at the void from the edge of the rooftop. One step and it would all be over. His notebooks and backpack were stacked tidily to the side, not that it would matter in a few seconds anyway. His latest notebook, burnt and soaked, had been lovingly put on the top of the pile. He would have thrown them into a garbage bin, if only so that no one would have to clean up after he was gone, but he couldn't bear to part with his lifeline for these last few minutes. A few minutes, and it would all be over. Izuku closed his eyes and took a deep breath. The building he chose was isolated, if only so that he wouldn't accidentally traumatize any unlucky passerby, but he could still hear the sounds of thousands of people going about their day. He wondered if even one of them would mourn when he was dead. Probably not. He was worthless, after all. Useless. A Deku. Kacchan and the other classmates would probably rejoice at not having to deal with his creepy muttering anymore. The teachers probably wouldn't care. His foster parents would probably breathe a sigh of relief at not having to deal with the quirkless Deku anymore. They would probably throw away his stuff with glee. Idly, Izuku wondered if there really was an afterlife. Maybe he could finally be with his mum. Or maybe he could be reborn with a quirk like Kacchan said. He hoped he wouldn't be such a Deku in his next life. Izuku was hesitating, he knew it. Maybe he wanted someone to stop him at the last moment, to wrap him up in warm blankets like his mum used to tell him he wasn't a worthless waste of space, to hand him a miracle and a will to live. But those were impossible dreams, the dreams of a useless Deku who couldn't do anything but dream. With that thought, Izuku jumped. It was peaceful in a way. The wind roared in his ears, pushing away the sounds of Midoryia. Izuku opened his eyes to stare at the sky, blue dotted with sparse white clouds. His usually overactive tear ducts lay dormant, allowing him to enjoy the view unobstructed. Smiling, Izuku squeezed his eyes shut on last time and braced for impact. Midoryia Izuku opened his eyes. He was standing at the edge of a rooftop, a pile of notebooks and his backpack arranged tidily next to him. Impossible. Midoryia Izuku stumbled back from the edge of the rooftop. This was impossible. He had jumped, he had felt the impact of hitting the ground, but here he was, as good as new, standing at the edge of the rooftop preparing to jump. Unless, did he hallucinate it? Or is this something his dying mind conjured? Izuku pinched himself. No, that wasn't it. All of this was real. He couldn't have imagined the pain of hitting the ground, and if this was some pre-death hallucination, his body would certainly hurt more. That meant he did jump. He jumped, he died, and now he was back as good as new. Impossible. Except, it wasn't impossible, was it? In the age of quirks, not much was impossible. Unbidden, Izuku's mind wandered back to a conversation when he was 7, one that had shattered his dreams. Sorry, kid. The doctor had said, usually, quirkless people have 2 joints in their pinky toes. Izuku only has 1, so I thought it is possible he is just a late bloomer. But even the latest bloomers usually show some sign of their quirk by 6 years old. It is rare for quirkless people to have only 1 toe joint, but evolution isn't a linear process. I'm sorry, but I don't think Izuku is ever going to manifest a quirk. Even after that conversation, Izuku had held out hope that he would spontaneously manifest a quirk. He had researched extensively on people who manifested their quirk later in life, finding only 4 recorded instances worldwide. After that, his mum had died, and his dreams had died with her. Well, resurrection is definitely a quirk that would go unnoticed for years. Izuku glanced back at the edge of the rooftop. If he was right, he wouldn't die even if he jumped again. If not, he was going to commit suicide anyway. Making his choice, Izuku jumped off the rooftop for a second time. This time, Izuku's journey towards the ground wasn't calm at all. The wind still roared in his ears, but his trepidation made the noise seem aggressive instead of soothing. He didn't turn to stare at the sky, but squeezed his eyes shut in preparation of the pain to come. Perhaps it was because he was aware of what was happening this time around, but when Izuku hit the ground for the second time, He was dimly aware of his body defying gravity and flying upwards. Izuku opened his eyes to see the ground fading away rapidly. Nearby, a bird flew backwards from a tree. In a blink, Izuku was back on the rooftop, looking as if he hadn't just died twice and feeling none the worse for wear. He didn't hallucinate this. It was definitely the effect of a quirk, most probably his own. But he had woken up on the rooftop, not on the ground. That meant it wasn't simply resurrection. Maybe a quirk that allowed him to return to a previous state? But then, the bird had flown backwards, almost as if time was rewinding. Of course. It made sense if he could rewind time when he died. If his quirk was one that could return him to a previous state, it would have activated when he was injured in that car crash 7 years ago. Grinning, Izuku grabbed his latest notebook from the pile and dug out a pencil. Finally, he had a quirk. Even if he had to die to activate it, it was a small price to pay for finally not being worthless. And there were so many possibilities in his quirk too. He could rewind time to redo battles, save people like his mum. At the reminder of her, Izuku stilled. He slumped to the ground, tugging his notebook to his chest. Why couldn't he have died in the car crash too? He would have discovered his quirk earlier, and he could have rewound time to save his mum. He wouldn't have landed in the foster system, Kacchan wouldn't hate him, he could live happily after with his. All the problems in his life would disappear. Suddenly, Izuku didn't feel like writing about the quirk that had failed him. He shoved the pencil into his pocket, grabbed his things, and made his way down the building. Izuku had barely entered the tunnel when he was accosted by something black and viscous. For the third time that day, he was dying. As he clawed at the sludge trying to force its way down his throat, Izuku realized blasely that falling to his death was a much better alternative to drowning. As he was about to black out, a strong gust of wind blew the sludge apart. Izuku's last sight before dying was an all-might-colored blob shaking his shoulders. It was relieving to feel the sludge retreat from his lungs. In this rewinding state, Izuku was certain it was a time-rewinding quirk. Now the burning of his lungs and the foul taste of the sludge were somewhat muted. Still, it felt a lot worse compared to the last 2 times he hadn't even felt the pain when rewinding past the point he crashed onto the ground. Izuku found himself walking backwards until he once again stood in front of the tunnel. In the dimly lit environment, he could barely make out some black liquid seeping out of a drain. He turned around and ran, but it was too late. The sludge engulfed him, forcing its way down his throat as he helplessly struggled. Just as another painful death seemed imminent, the sludge was once again blasted away from him. Thank goodness. I thought I lost you there. Out of all the people Izuku thought had saved him, All Might was nowhere on the list. Izuku wasn't lucky enough to meet his hero, let alone be saved by him. Stuttering, Izuku asked for an autograph, only to find one of his notebooks, not the one battered by Kacchan, fortunately already signed. Be off. See you around. Wait, what? All Might was leaving already? But he had so much to ask him after what had happened earlier. Izuku couldn't let All Might leave yet. Not yet. He couldn't. Izuku burst into tears. What? Why are you crying? Boy, I understand meeting a villain is scary, but you are safe now, because... Izuku stuttered out apology after apology, but All Might could not seem to tame his confusion any more than Izuku was able to tame his tears. Izuku noted with dread that All Might would probably hate him after this. Through his tears and apologies, Izuku managed to confess his quirk's initial appearance earlier that day. He told his hero how he was considered quirkless for the past 10 years, and how he finally discovered his ability to rewind time minutes before being attacked by the sludge villain, purposefully omitting the part about dying. He couldn't tell anyone about that, not now, if ever. Then, timidly, he asked the question everyone had replied negatively to for the past 10 years. Can I be a hero too? All Might stared. A cough made its way out of his giant body, staining his lips and chin red. Izuku's hero began to steam. What impossible? Except, what was impossible at this point? In the past hour, Izuku found out he had a quirk, died 3 times and nearly did it again a 4th time, met his hero, and then cried in front of said hero. So, why not? At this point, it was perfectly possible that All Might was a glorified skeleton who was missing a stomach and regularly coughed up blood. Izuku would keep this secret for him. It was the least a Deku like him could do, especially since he forced All Might to reveal his secret in the first place. All Might's secret was the most important, but what was nearly as important was his answer to Izuku. With a quirk like yours, you can rewind time again and again until every last victim is saved. Even if you fail once, you can do better next time and save just as many people as me. Boy, you too can be a hero. With that answer, All Might left, but Izuku felt his presence all the way back to his foster home. He felt lighter. Finally, someone believed he could be a hero. All Might, the symbol of peace, the #1 hero of Japan, believed he had what it took to be a hero. He couldn't have made a mistake. His word was practically law, which meant everyone who had said he couldn't do it was clearly wrong. Joy coursed through Izuku's veins. He would master his quirk, and he would use it to help as many people as possible, even if it meant dying every day. After all, what was the life of one Deku compared to that of countless others? Back in his bedroom, Izuku opened the first page of a new notebook, a viridian-colored one he picked up on the way home, and wrote one word: rewind. Izuku was going to become a hero with his quirk, which meant he needed more data to understand his quirk. Based on his experiences the previous day, he could at least subconsciously control how far back he rewound, seeing that his quirk disposed him seconds before he was in any danger. Last night, he had already filled 1/4 of his new notebook with hypotheses. Unfortunately, there was only one way to test his hypotheses. That led Izuku back onto the roof for the second day in a row. This time, however, Izuku had smuggled out an alarm clock, a kitchen knife, and a whetstone. He wrapped the knife in this morning's newspaper to transport it safely. Izuku was the only one to use the kitchen. His foster parents usually ate outside or bought takeout for dinner, so they probably wouldn't miss the utensils. It hadn't taken much for Izuku to conclude that death by anything other than knife wouldn't work. It took time to find a building and climb to the rooftop, time Izuku couldn't afford if he used his quirk for hero work. Too many people would see him and try to stop him, even though they really shouldn't bother. And it was illegal to carry any weapon other than a knife around, although the quickest way to die would probably be a bullet to the head. Technically, a knife was skirting the edge of the law, but Izuku hoped he could use his identity in the neighborhood as a Deku to his advantage. For once no one saw a presumed quirkless person and thought, danger, even if they were carrying a knife. Izuku also felt bad for using All Might's face as a makeshift sheath, but he didn't have a better alternative. The article headline, All Might in Mizudafu, was followed by a photo of All Might handing in 2 bottles of the sludge villain to the police. Izuku felt slightly bad for the sludge villain. Being crammed into a bottle couldn't have felt good. Still, he was glad that the villain was caught before he could hurt anyone other than him. At least Izuku could pretend All Might was present and cheering him on through the photo. He placed the items and his notebooks on the roof and stretched his limbs. He always carried his stack of notebooks with him, ever since his foster father threw them out the last time he left them in his room. It wasn't really Fuji-san's fault. Izuku had overslept and forgotten to prepare breakfast before hurrying to school, which caused both foster parents to be late to work. Still, Izuku wasn't keen to repeat the experience. His arms ached constantly with carrying them around every day, and not one of his notebooks were free of Kacchan's scorch marks, but they were things he had learnt to live with. After a few minutes of sitting on the roof, Izuku unwrapped the knife. He had decided to start small. He would try to rewind a few minutes first. Swallowing, he brought the knife to his chest and slid it between his ribs. Izuku's breath hitched as the knife punctured his chest. He could feel the blade move with his chest. It hurt, but it was nothing compared to drowning. He yanked the knife out, leaving the weapon in slowed blood loss. It slid out easier than it went in. A few minutes had passed now. Izuku's chest burnt, and it hurt to breathe, but Kacchan on a bad day hurt worse than the stab wound. He wasn't dying fast enough. Izuku brought the knife to his chest again. His hands were shaking. They weren't supposed to be shaking. He plunged the knife in, but his shaking hands twisted the knife sideways, lodging it between his ribs. The knife was stuck. Izuku cried out. With every breath his lung brushed against the knife. He grasped the hilt and pulled, but his hands were slippery with blood. Damn it, when had that happened, and why won't the knife just come out? Just because Izuku was used to pain didn't mean he liked it. With a split-second decision, Izuku threw himself off the roof. Rewind brought him back to the roof, with his hands clean and no stab wounds in his chest. So that was a disaster. For the rest of the afternoon, Izuku tried various methods of stabbing himself. It was not as easy as the movies depicted. He could, theoretically, stab himself in the neck, but his aim was off half of the time. He tried slitting his wrists, but all that led to was a slow, unpleasant death via blood loss. On a more positive note, the blade was kept constantly sharp from the rewinds, so there was no actual need for the whetstone. In the end, Izuku tried the traditional harakiri method. It was messy and painful, but surprisingly efficient. He supposed it'd have to do for now. He also confirmed his quirk worked a lot like rewinding a video clip. Time moved backwards faster than usual, and he could pause and permit time to move forward at any moment he chose. Currently, his subconscious seemed to deposit him in the moment before he was in any mortal danger if he didn't concentrate. He would need to practice rewinding to the exact moment he wanted. He should also test how far back he could rewind, but it was something he should do another day. Exhausted but satisfied, Izuku left the roof. On the way back, he bought a switchblade with tomorrow's lunch money. He'd have to skip lunch tomorrow, but it would be worth it. Somehow, he felt like his life was finally coming back together. The next order of business was changing his quirk registration. Unfortunately, when Izuku searched for the procedure to change one's registration online, he discovered he had to display his quirk before the registrars. That wouldn't be a problem for most people, but considering his quirk's activation requirements, it didn't feel like a good idea. What if the registrars stopped him before he could activate his quirk? It seemed like he would have to learn how to hack the Hero Commission, the government body responsible for all things quirk-related. Good thing the laptop his mum had left him was still in good condition. There were only 10 months before the UA entrance exam. Izuku quickly realized he simply didn't have enough time to deal with school, learn to hack and train for the entrance exam. His quirk proved quite useful in this situation. As long as he timed everything right so as to not erase the notes he'd written or the effects of the exercises he did, Izuku had all the time in the world. He settled into something of a routine. Early in the morning, Izuku left for a run before returning to the apartment to prepare breakfast for his foster parents and do his quieter chores, then left for the library to work on his hacking skills and homework. More often than not, he spent the entire day there before rewinding to go to school, then spent the rest of the afternoon doing workouts until it was well past his curfew. Not that it was much of a problem. His foster parents were content to ignore him if he stayed quiet and did his chores on time, which meant Izuku could sneak home at any time he chose, prepare the small dinner he was permitted, take a shower and immediately crash into bed. Quirk practice was peppered in whenever it seemed reasonable, such as when Kacchan and his followers felt like hunting him. The routine was exhausting, but his dream to be a hero was finally within reach. What was a little fatigue in the face of that? He felt better than since before his mother died. Izuku squinted at his laptop. In history class, they had been assigned a research project about schools in the pre-quirk era, which meant he had to spend his time researching instead of working on more useful things. Apparently, all Japanese schools in the pre-quirk era offered free lunches, something only a handful of schools, such as UA, currently did. Izuku was almost jealous, but then he remembered he wouldn't have any money to buy notebooks and other things he needed if that was the case. Izuku's door slammed open to reveal his foster mother's furious face. Jumping, he slammed the notebook depicting his quirk shut. Midoryia, why are there 2 police officers here about you hacking into the Hero Commission's database? Izuku froze. Yesterday was the day he had finally felt confident enough to change the quirk registration records. Midoryia, what do you put the knife down? Midoryia, stop, wait, don't. Time sped by in the now familiar manner. Izuku felt a wave of nausea wash across him as he crossed the 9-hour mark, the longest he had rewound before feeling sick. Still, he pressed on. He just had to turn back time for a few more hours, to before he hacked the registration records, just a bit more, a bit. Moments before he powered on his laptop, Izuku finally released his quirk and allowed time to revert to normal. Immediately, he was assaulted with another wave of nausea and a sharp pain in his abdomen. Izuku fell out of his chair and vomited onto the floor. Groaning, he shifted into a sitting position. the nausea and stabbing pain gradually eased up. When Izuku felt less like he would throw up again if he moved even slightly, he glanced down at the mess on the floor. A pool of viscous blood sat on the floor, almost as if he had just died again. So that's what happened when he overused his quirk. It would be such a pain to clean up. At least he had hacked the commission in his bedroom instead of the library. That would have led to unwanted attention. Izuku swallowed. This would be the third time he attempted hacking the commission. The first 2 times had ended up with him vomiting blood on the floor. He really hoped this would work. He didn't want to clean up the floor a 3rd time. A draft of his quirk description had long since been written in his notebook. Izuku kept it purposefully vague, and especially didn't even hint at its activation requirements. From his brief dip into internet forums, it was a common habit among people who didn't quite trust the system, so Izuku's description shouldn't ring any warning bells. He took a deep breath and set his hovering hands onto the keyboard. Time to get to work. Izuku paused, hand hovering over his nearly full notebook. He'd have to buy a new one as soon as he received next week's lunch money. He just had an idea. A brilliant idea that was so obvious he didn't know why he never thought of it before. There was a much better alternative to quick deaths than harakiri and throwing himself off the roof. Poison. From his experience with the knife, Izuku knew the poison supply would rewind along with everything else, which meant he only needed enough for a single dose. It turned out to be worryingly easy for a 14-year-old to acquire a cyanide pill, even if he had to use up the entire week's lunch money. Izuku would have been concerned, but he would much rather count his blessings. He placed the capsule in a locket acquired at the thrift store. It was an innocuous thing, a simple rose gold amulet hanging on a similarly colored chain. If anyone asked, Izuku would just say it contained a photo of his dead mother. It always made people back away. Even Kacchan never bullied him about Mum. In other news, no police officer showed up to arrest him, for both hacking the hero commission and for the purchase of the cyanide pill. Izuku hoped his luck would hold. Days and weeks and months slipped by. Izuku felt more fulfilled than ever. Whereas he used to wait impatiently for the day's end, he now pursued every spare second to the fullest. He barely saw his foster parents these days, something which he was certain they preferred. He also rarely acquired any new burn marks, thanks to his quirk. He didn't have to waste money stocking supplies to treat his burns any longer. Tomorrow was the day of the UA entrance exam. Izuku should be so worried he couldn't sleep, but he somehow wasn't. He had prepared for the exam to the best of his ability. He had studied everything that could possibly come up in the written exam, scourged the internet for hints of the testing material in both the written and practical portion, and adapted his workout routine to suit himself best, with a focus on speed and stamina rather than bodybuilding. The current Izuku didn't look different from the one 10 months ago, with an exception of much larger eye bags, but Izuku knew he had become faster and stronger, even though his body refused to develop the muscles to show it. He could do this. Even if he couldn't, he'd just rewind until he succeeded. Or maybe his exhaustion had translated into a general lethargy. Maybe the panic he didn't currently feel would drown him tomorrow. At any rate, tomorrow would be the day he made it into UA, even if it killed him to do it. Something about Deku had changed. It was gradual, so gradual that none of the extras seemed to notice it. But Katsuki was better than them for a reason. Deku always seemed to know when Katsuki was looking for him nowadays. Every time the useless fucker did something that annoyed him, he always seemed to mysteriously vanish right after, no matter how much effort Katsuki put into looking for him. No one could ever find him, not even when Katsuki set the simpering extras on his trail. Not only that, Deku came to class with an increasingly pale face and increasingly apparent shadows around his eyes. Instead of loitering around playgrounds and hero fights to eye everyone's quirks like a hawk, he vanished immediately after school let out, as if he didn't exist outside of school hours. He didn't mutter anymore, but the way he now dissected people with just his gaze was somehow worse. It was creepy as F-. With the behavior Deku was exhibiting, he had probably joined a gang or something. Not that Katsuki cared. The fucker could die in a ditch, and he wouldn't waste a single tear over him. Katsuki hated Deku with a burning passion. Something about him constantly grated on Katsuki's nerve, the way he eyed others' quirks almost hungrily, the ease with which he carelessly exposed people's actions and weaknesses, the manner in which he used to babble about nothing and everything at once. Just thinking about him left a bad taste in Katsuki's mouth. Deku should be the one dead, not brave, sweet Auntie Inko, who always acted nicer to him than the hag. He might have been 7 when the car crash happened, but he distinctly remembered the impact it had on his family. He remembered the night the police officer came to inform them of the news in excruciating detail. Auntie Inko's relatives were dead and ex-boyfriend had fled off to America the moment he found she was pregnant, which meant the hag was Auntie's emergency contact. He remembered how the hag was silent for a day or two, before becoming even more insufferable and frustrating. He remembered Deku, silent and shaking on the hospital bed, unable to process Auntie's death even when he was being shipped off to a foster home. Before, Katsuki always held back when dealing with Deku, for Auntie Inko's sake. He didn't bother anymore after she died. It might have been better if Deku moved from Yuzudafu. But no. Deku had to go to Aldera, where Katsuki had to look at his DMN face every day, the face that was so much like Auntie Inko but lacked everything that made him love her. Deku was cowardly when she was brave, panicky when she was firm, weak when she was strong, creepy when she was anything but that. Deku's existence was a travesty to Auntie Inko's memory. Everything Deku touched became worthless, just like him. No quirk, no friends, no family, he ruined it all with his mere presence. Katsuki never gave Deku more than what he deserved. It would be so much better if Deku died. Izuku was doing quite a good job of keeping himself from panicking about today's entrance exam until Kacchan appeared. Like usual, he heard before he saw the explosive blonde, screaming Izuku's nickname across the crowd. Izuku flinched. He had been doing such a good job avoiding Kacchan, he didn't want to break the streak on such an important day. Grimacing, he tried to find a way to slip away, but the road to UA was packed with heroics hopefuls. It'd be practically impossible to slip out his knife or his cyanide pill before someone tried to stop him. Before Izuku could concoct a plan, Kacchan marched up to him and grabbed his arm. Fiery sparks burnt into Izuku's flesh. He'd have to reverse his injuries once Kacchan was through with him. Deku! Kacchan snarled, thankfully in a low tone that wouldn't attract too much attention. What the F do you think you're doing here? Taking the UA entrance exam, just like you. Izuku murmured, praying his voice wasn't trembling as much as he thought. You can't stop me from being here, Kacchan. I told you not to apply, you dumb F-. I'm going to be the only one from our shitty school to make it in. You don't stand a chance, Deku. Leave. Kacchan hissed. 10 months ago, Izuku would have folded like wet tissue and complied with Kacchan's wishes. But now? He might still be a Deku, but Izuku hadn't worked himself to the bone just to give up on his only chance. That's not your choice. He snapped before he could stop himself. I worked hard for a chance to be here, a chance to become a hero. Even if I fail, I'll fail having given everything I've got. I'm not just going to give up like a coward, and you can't make me. Kacchan looked taken aback by Izuku's attitude, but before he could muster a response, someone swung an arm around Izuku's shoulder. They loudly proclaimed, "Hey, look at the time. We won't have a chance to prepare if we keep standing here. If you'll excuse me," the speaker said to Kacchan, "my friend and I have to get going." With that, they ripped Izuku from Kacchan's grip and slammed their way past the stunned blonde. It was only when they were a safe distance from Kacchan that Izuku's savior gasped and exclaimed, "Oh my Kami! Are you okay? I just saw that guy harassing you and had to interfere." Izuku finally turned to take a good look at his rescuer. She was a short brunette girl, about Izuku's height. Her hair was styled into a bob with 2 long bangs at the forefront, and she had twin pink spots on her cheeks. A physical mutation? Oh, it's fine. That's just Kacchan, we go to the same school. Thanks for your help, though, he said, even as his heart was racing. This was possibly the first time he had came out of an encounter with Kacchan mostly unscathed. Apart from gripping his forearm, Kacchan hadn't even touched him. He wouldn't even have to use rewind to deal with any debilitating injuries. The girl nodded. I'm Uraraka Ochako. What's your name? Oh, how long has it been since someone was interested in learning his name? I'm Midoryia Izuku. Midoryia, the name fits you. The girl giggled, but Izuku didn't get the sense that she was laughing at him. Are those your notes? Uraraka peered at the stack of notebooks in Izuku's arms. Did you fill all of those to prepare for the entrance exam? Izuku laughed nervously. Yeah, they're my notes. Just not about the entrance exam. Uraraka whistled. You're so dedicated. They look heavy. Do you want me to help carry them? Izuku shook his head. No way was he going to let anyone handle his notebooks, even if Uraraka seemed nice enough. It's a good weightlifting exercise. If you say so. Uraraka replied doubtfully. That Kacchan guy is your classmate? He's such a prick, I can't believe someone like him thinks he can make it far into heroics. He's got a brilliant quirk, and he's really strong. His attitude isn't that good, though, Izuku admitted. Standing up to Kacchan with his voice drowned out by the crowd was one thing, but admitting Kacchan's flaw to a stranger was an entirely different matter. Izuku couldn't help but feel like he was committing blasphemy. Yeah, that's what I thought. Uraraka exclaimed. Though with his personality, I doubt he's worried about the exam. Lucky him. I feel like my stomach's about to commit murder. She glanced again at Izuku's notes. I doubt you're worrying much too. You seemed, overprepared. Izuku blinked. Overprepared? I think I'd still be underprepared if I had another month. I felt prepared yesterday, but I'm pretty sure I was just too exhausted to worry. Uraraka snorted. Don't be modest. I don't think I've seen anyone with so many notebooks. She paused and blinked. Oh, we're here. Izuku looked up at the giant gates to UA High. The school was huge, even bigger than in the photos. Standing in front of the school, Izuku felt hopelessly small, as if his dreams were too shallow to matter. Well, he had never mattered in the first place. It didn't mean he wasn't going to try his best to become a hero, so that his life could finally mean something. Uraraka broke out of their stupor first. She gave a nervous chuckle. Well, I guess that's it. Good luck. I hope we'll see each other again as classmates. Izuku nodded, pasting a wobbly smile onto his face. Good luck to you too. It was time. The written exam was easy. Boringly so. There had to be a catch. There had to. UA's written exams were known to be tricky and subversive, but while there were plenty of traps that would catch the unprepared examinee unaware, Izuku couldn't spot the twists that everyone on the forums talked about. Still, no matter how many times Izuku anxiously checked the paper, he couldn't find the crazily difficult trick questions that had cost many people their spots in the heroics course. But, well, if such many people couldn't spot the trick questions, then what chance did a Deku like him have of doing it? He could rewind and redo the paper, but what was the point when he had already triple-checked it and still couldn't spot what was wrong? All Izuku could do was let go of his unease and continue onto the truly difficult part of the exam, the practical. UA's heroics course entrance exam was split into two portions: the written exam, which consisted of 40% of the final score, and the practical exam, which consisted of 60% of the final score. Those who did well in the practical were almost certainly guaranteed a spot in the heroics course, but for those who did not have completely combat-orientated quirks, which was most people, the written portion could be their saving grace or the final blow that struck down their dreams. All of that was easily revealed by the numerous online forums about this exact topic. Izuku fit snugly into the latter category, which was why he was so anxious about doing well in the written exam. Now that he might have missed every single trick question, he had to do extremely well in the practical. Sure, he could go into Gen Ed and transfer over through the sports festival, but his chance of winning the sports festival was even slimmer than acing the practical. Along with the rest of the examinees, Izuku was herded into an auditorium, where Present Mike explained the practical exam. Izuku would certainly fanboy over the voice hero's appearance once he felt like he wasn't going to kneel over from anxiety. Right now, though, he was entirely focused on the exam, with his mouth firmly shut and his hands itching for a pencil. Izuku had finally put in the effort to quit his muttering habit a while back, lest anyone find out about the details to his quirk, and with Kacchan glaring daggers next to him, he didn't dare utilize the stack of notebooks in his lap. The practical was different every year, but the base components were always the same. Izuku had engraved a list into his mind. The exam always favored combative quirks, to the surprise of no one on the forums. B. The exam proctors had a strange habit of not giving any warning before the start of the exam. C. There were rescue points. The rescue points was the most important part. According to the forums, they were never officially declared to be part of the exam. However, the teachers gave additional points to anyone who helped other candidates at their own detriment. These rescue points were supposed to be a secret, so naturally everyone on the internet knew about them. Izuku assumed the other candidates knew about them too, which meant he had to be careful when using his quirk. He couldn't entirely rely on the rescue points either, but he hoped actively gaining rescue points would be enough to give him an edge. Robots. Why did it have to be robots? They were waiting tensely in front of the fake city where the practical would take place. Izuku could hear equal murmurs of dissent and excitement in the crowd. He was definitely in the former group, but, well, his life had never been fair. He hadn't expected this exam to be easy. Still, having to fight robots with nothing but his bare hands was definitely on the lower spectrum of his luck. Kacchan would have fun blasting them apart, though. Izuku could see Midoryia in the crowd, but he didn't want to bother her more than he already had by needing her rescue. Then, the gigantic gates to the exam grounds swung open. With a shout from Present Mike, Izuku bolted as if Kacchan was hot on his tail. To his surprise, none of the other examinees followed him. Just as he began worrying if his information was wrong after all, the rest of the candidates surged in like a tsunami. Izuku could barely keep his lead. Before long, he reached the first cluster of robots 4 one-pointers. As the robots turned their gazes on him, Izuku froze. He hadn't planned this far. How was he supposed to disable them? Suddenly, a beam of light shot through the robots, instantly destroying them. A French-sounding boy preened at him, before turning away to deal with another robot. His quirk looked focus. Izuku narrowed his gaze on the metal scraps that formerly made up the one-pointers. He could use them. Grabbing a sizable scrap from the pile, he turned to a two-pointer. It was turned away from him, instead towering over another examinee. Ignoring the jagged edges of the metal that cut into his arms, Izuku jabbed the scrap into the wiring of the robot, which promptly fell apart. One down, several dozens more to go. He gave a hand to the fallen candidate to help her up. The candidate gave him a grateful smile and sped off. Izuku shifted his grip on the scrap. It was heavy. Damn it, he hadn't focused on strength in his exercises. Maybe if he took a smaller piece? Izuku selected a long, jagged piece from the variety of scraps that now littered the exam grounds. The fake city currently looked like an impromptu junkyard, which it kind of was. The metal scrap was shaped like a sword. The sharp edges made his palms bleed sluggishly, but it would also make cutting the wiring of the robots easier. It'd do. Izuku was glad he had trained his speed and stamina. Because, as it turned out, the robots could shoot lasers. He couldn't remember Present Mike talking about that detail. He ducked another blast from a three-pointer that had cornered a candidate. Izuku had thrown a rock at it to attract its attention, at which point the candidate had promptly scampered away. Except it turned out someone had outfitted guns onto the three-pointers. Izuku couldn't get close enough to stab it with his impromptu sword. The smaller piece of metal allowed him more maneuverability, but not enough to disable this robot. The robot shot another beam at Izuku. He ducked. A boom resounded behind his back. Izuku turned to find a passing two-pointer reduced to another pile of scrap metal by the stray beam. But a happy accident. The heat of a beam grazed his shoulder. Izuku cursed. He had already spent too much point on this three-pointer. He had to focus. Suddenly, the robot floated into the sky, only to drop back onto the ground with a loud sound. Midoryia waved at him behind the disabled robot. Izuku breathed a sigh of relief. The examinee was bleeding, blood rushing from the deep cut on their thigh. Not that Izuku was doing much better, but they clearly didn't know how to deal with it. Izuku should have brought his first aid kit. All he currently had was his switchblade and his grimy shirt. Maybe the candidate's shirt instead? No, it seemed somehow worse off than his own, quite a feat. With his knife, Izuku cut a swath of cloth from the bottom of his shirt. He'd lose a shirt, but it'd be worth it. He quickly bandaged the wound. It'd hold until the end of the exam. Probably. Hopefully it wouldn't be infected. Izuku stabbed another two-pointer that was creeping up on a candidate. They did that a lot. He hadn't had to use his quirk yet. With the way the practical was going, should he retake the exam? He knew a lot of things that he could do better the second time around, but some of the lucky shots, he didn't think he could recreate them. 3 minutes left. Present Mick's voice rang over the fake city. Well, Izuku could decide after the exam was over. He pulled an unassuming examinee from path of a stray quirk blast. The examinee looked at him in surprise. Izuku gave him a wobbly smile and moved on. Just as he was burying his impromptu sword into a three-pointer, the ground shuddered. Screams began to ring from the city center. It didn't take long to see why. The zero-pointer, which was as tall as a building, what the F, had arrived. Izuku turned to move away. It wouldn't make sense to go closer, with the stampede and all, even if there were more robots in that direction. But then he saw something that stole the breath from his lungs. Izuku squinted. Was that really? Oh, Kami, it was Uraraka. Uraraka, trapped beneath the rubble, was in the direct path of the zero-pointer. Izuku began to run towards the zero-pointer. He wouldn't reach there in time. He wouldn't know. He had to. He didn't make it. Before his eyes, the robot stepped onto Uraraka. Kami, no, he had to calm down. This was exactly what his quirk was, for he could still save Uraraka. With shaking hands, Izuku opened his locket's clasp and placed the pill within into his mouth. He bit on it. Dying from cyanide poison was unpleasant, but quick. With a few convulsions, Izuku found himself back at the moment after the zero-pointer appeared. He began running and reached Uraraka in record time. Midoryia? Uraraka slurred. She sounded like she had a concussion. You need to leave. I'm not leaving without you. Izuku threw his weight against the rubble. It didn't budge. He tried to lift the rubble from beneath, praying that adrenaline would lend him power akin to a strength quirk. It didn't. The zero-pointer was nearly upon them. Izuku had to hurry. Maybe if he used his metal scrap as a lever. No, it's not working, damn it. He needed more time. Too late. There was a brief moment of darkness as the robot's foot descended on them. Uraraka screamed at him to run, but what was the point? He still hadn't. And then his bones snapped and rearranged, and Izuku was once again slipping through time. He couldn't lift the rubble. He was too weak, too useless. But what if he saved Uraraka before she was trapped by the rubble? Focusing through the haze of fear and failure, Izuku rewound to the exact moment before the zero-pointer appeared. Leaving his sword buried in the three-pointer he had just taken down moments ago, Izuku ran. He could see the rubble fall down as if in slow motion. There wasn't enough time, but he couldn't fail again. He couldn't let Uraraka die again. Izuku pushed Uraraka out of the way. Good, she was safe. And then the rubble fell onto him. Uraraka stumbled and turned around, face furious. What, Midoryia? Izuku gave her a shaky smile. Damn it. He'd have to rewind another round. At least Uraraka didn't die this time. Uraraka furrowed her brows. She placed her palms onto the giant piece of rubble and easily pushed it away. Then, Uraraka pulled Izuku to his feet. They stumbled to the edge of the street, clearing the path moments before the robots stepped on exactly where they had been. Uraraka breathed an audible sigh of relief and gave Izuku a shaky smile of her own. She then proceeded to empty her stomach on the floor. And little listeners, that's time's up. At present Mick's announcement, Izuku slumped onto the floor. The exam was over. Uraraka wiped her lips and sat down next to him. Thanks. Izuku nodded at her, but didn't speak. The thought of redoing the exam briefly crossed his mind, but Izuku quickly dismissed the idea. He couldn't imagine going through that a second time. The two sat in silence. Uraraka's quirk was puzzling. Why hadn't she lifted the rubble herself the first 2 times when she could do it so easily for him? Her appearance didn't contain the usual characteristics attributed to strength quirks either. Perhaps it changed the weight of things she touched? Whatever. He could analyze her quirk when he wasn't feeling so off. This wasn't even the worst thing to happen to him. And Uraraka was okay now, thanks to his quirk. So why did Izuku feel as if he was watching his mum die all over again? How did you know the rubble was going to fall on me? Uraraka asked, startling him from his morose thoughts. You weren't anywhere near me. I have a time-rewinding quirk. Izuku told her quietly. Briefly, he registered that this was the first time he actually told anyone about his quirk. On any other day, he would have been worried that Uraraka wouldn't believe him, but now he simply couldn't find it in himself to care. I saw the rubble trapping you the first time, and she died because of it, so I rewound time to save you. Uraraka blinked. Wow. She gave him a bright, heartfelt smile. I never thought someone would mess with the time stream to help me. Thank you, Midoryia. Some of the ice in Izuku's chest that he hadn't even known was there melted away. He smiled again, but this one felt more genuine than any he could remember in recent years. He had saved someone. For once, he hadn't been useless. Then Recovery Girl arrived. She'd scared at Izuku's injuries, and ignoring Izuku's protests that he was fine and she shouldn't waste her quirk on him, healed them, before sending the two away with several gummy bears. After taking a quick shower, Izuku found Uraraka outside the boys' locker room, waiting for him. To his shock, she insisted they exchange numbers, and didn't even comment on the battered state of his phone. If anything, her phone was just as battered as his. The frost in his chest receded entirely as Uraraka explained that they had saved each other, and were therefore now friends, his first friends since Kacchan, since his mother. Think of it. Quietly, his fears of failing the exam and the incident with the zero-pointer drifted to the back of his mind. Despite everything, Izuku's day was much better than what he could have hoped for. Shota didn't expect anything special about this year's candidates. Every year, the entrance exam candidates consisted mostly of brats who thought they should be handed everything on a golden platter because of their heroic quirk. There would be some with potential scattered among the crowd, but the entrance exam didn't always do a great job of weeding them out. Thus, Shota's class would end up with mostly brats and only a few who could make it far as heroes. It was the same pattern he had seen repeated over most of his teaching career, and he didn't see any indication this year would deviate from normal. There was the boy with an explosion quirk. He destroyed the robots with wild abandon, uncaring of how his actions affected the other candidates. Another boy had an electricity quirk. His quirk was quite powerful, but his grasp on it was poor, often leading to him accidentally electrifying other candidates. The boy himself appeared to be mindful of this, and sometimes let the robots go rather than risk hitting the people around him. A girl with vines for hair pulled robots apart while shielding the other candidates. Her rescue points would be high. Tensei's brother, who scored 6th place in the recommendation exam. Just 1 place too low to enter the heroics course, after the first-place student Yurashi dropped out. From what Tensei told Hisashi, the youngest Ida was beyond stressed. A girl with a frog-like mutation, a boy who could control animals, another girl who had earphone cords attached to her ears. Their control was precise. They had potential. Then, one kid decided to attack the robots with shrapnel from fallen robots. Of all the years Shota had proctored the exam, people had attacked the robots with their quirks, registered support items and weapons. Somehow, never with what was provided by their surroundings. The ones who got into the heroics course were always the ones who either had combative quirks, or had a preemptive plan for how to fight without one. Those who didn't have a game plan rarely bounced back, and instead spent the practical half-heartedly wandering the fake city. This one clearly did not have a game plan. But he had improvised and used his surroundings to his advantage. That was a skill just as valuable as planning ahead. Shota narrowed his eyes. The kid with the green curls. He's resourceful. Indeed. Yagi exclaimed. I remember that I saved him some months ago. His name is Midoryia, was it? He has a time-related quirk quite rare and powerful, from what he told me, and he asked if he could become a hero. I said yes, of course. With an interested glint in his eyes, Nedzu opened the boy's file on his pad and handed it to Shota. The boy Midoryia Izuku had a time loop quirk, one that allowed him to rewind time. The details on his quirk were sparse, but any quirk related to time manipulation was rare and powerful, like Yagi said. From the way Midoryia was being caught off guard, Shota doubted he had used his quirk yet. Was he waiting for the exam to be over before retaking it? Or were there special activation parameters? Was Midoryia saving it as a last resort? Curiously, Shota kept studying the green-haired boy. He had good situational awareness, as shown by the way he kept track of people around him, taking care to pull people from stray blasts and going out of his way to help candidates in trouble. That was more than what could be said about most candidates. He didn't appear to be using his quirk, though. There wasn't enough foresight in his actions. Shota watched as Midoryia cut up his shirt to bandage a candidate's wounds. The boy hadn't registered any weapons for the practical, the reason he was using a metal shard instead of his pocket knife to attack robots. Registering support items and weapons for the entrance exam was a complicated process, in which students had to appeal for the necessity of the items, apply for licenses to prove they knew how to handle said items, and get quite a number of signatures for approval. It was no wonder that few people chose that option. However, since he wasn't using it to fight the robots, what Midoryia did was technically not against the rules. The boy should cut a piece of cloth to wrap around his metal shard too. Using a weapon that hurt himself was counterproductive. Then, Nezu released the zero-pointers with maniac glee. Students screamed as the zero-pointer emerged. In Midoriya's exam venue, a girl became trapped by rubble. Students ran by, unaware or uncaring of the injured candidate. Expected, but still disappointing. Midoryia appeared to notice, however. The boy ran towards the trapped girl, intent on helping. The zero-pointer was faster. Shota frowned. It was in the direct trajectory of the girl. The sensors in the robot should have shut it down by now. It wasn't stopping. The zero-pointer moved steadily towards the girl, who was no closer to getting out than a few moments ago. Frowning, Nezu activated the manual override. Midoryia ran towards the trapped girl. He tried to push the rubble away, but appeared to be too weak to do so. The robot should have stopped by now. It was about to step onto the students. Nezu activated the manual override, but something was wrong. The robot still wasn't stopping. Shota stood as Maijima moved to assist Nezu. Yagi buffed up into his hero form and was out of the door before the other teachers could move. For once, he was too slow. Midoryia suddenly tensed and ran towards the city center, arriving just in time to push a girl out of the way of falling rubble. He had finally used his quirk, and it was to save another candidate. Shota watched as the two cleared the zero-pointer's path right before its sensor would have shut it down. "I'm taking Midoryia," he announced. The other teachers stared. What? Was it that rare that he showed interest in a student? "He has potential," he supplied. More staring. Shota huffed. All Might's recording was playing on loop on his desk. Izuku stared numbly at it. He was dreaming. He had to be. Second place in the written exam and 12th place in the practical was too high for a Deku like him. But no. Izuku pinched his thigh and was rewarded with a sharp stab of pain. On his desk, All Might repeated Izuku's ranking and offered his congratulations for the 9th time in a row. He wasn't dreaming. Izuku hadn't caught any of the subversive questions in the written portion, and his performance in the practical, well, it wasn't as bad as it could have been, but Izuku could have done much better. He definitely didn't do well enough to deserve 12th place. All Might was begging to differ. And Izuku couldn't imagine All Might playing a prank on him. Izuku's phone pinged. He opened it to see Uraraka messaging him. After the girl insisted on getting his number, they had exchanged texts regularly. Evidently, the girl was a social person and wouldn't give up any opportunity to make a new friend. It turned out Uraraka's quirk was zero gravity, hence why she could push the rubble like it weighed nothing in that moment. It had literally weighed nothing. Her hands must have been pinned for her to be unable to use her quirk the first 2 rewinds. Or she was too concussed to do anything. "Uraraka," asked Jisjich. "I got in." Izuku hesitated. This couldn't be a prank, but what if UA made a mistake? What if they mixed up the scores? No, this was UA. They wouldn't make such a mistake. But they had let Uraraka die, hadn't they? He could clearly imagine the resounding crack of her bones, even though he hadn't heard it over the chaos. Blood seeping from under the zero-pointer's foot, bones snapping and rearranging under the weight of a robot as large as a building. The impact had felt similar to the pain he felt when he fell off rooftops, but that was a pain he chose. Uraraka didn't choose for such an accident to happen. What if Izuku didn't have the quirk he had? What if he had noticed Uraraka too late? No, that was a freak accident. It wouldn't happen again. Izuku couldn't doubt Yue based on an accident that didn't really happen. Izuku had gotten in. He should stop doubting that. I got in too. Uraraka. His smiley face. Future classmates, laughing face. Izuku smiled. Honestly, he should stop second-guessing this. UA was the finest heroics institution in the world, doubting it was ridiculous. It would be fine. Everything would be fine. Somehow, he couldn't quite believe it. The very next day, the principal congratulated Izuku and Kacchan for getting into UA. It was the first time Izuku had been called to his office for anything other than one perceived slight or another. He should happy, but it was hard to feel anything positive with Kacchan next to him, looking as if he was contemplating the cruelest way to murder Izuku. After school, Kacchan tried to corner him, but Izuku avoided the explosive boy with the help of his quirk. Evidently, Kacchan was said that Izuku got into Yue more than the green-haired boy had thought he would be. Izuku knew Kacchan would get angrier the longer he held off their inevitable confrontation, but he couldn't help the gnawing pit in his stomach that appeared every time he imagined Kacchan cornering him. It wasn't that he was scared of Kacchan. He had talked back to the boy on the day of the entrance exam, but private conversations with Kacchan tended to end in pain and ruined belongings. Even knowing he'd regret it in the future, Izuku kept putting off their conversation. Izuku's last day of middle school ended with notably less fanfare than the other students. No one came to his graduation ceremony, and he went home silently while the other students went out for graduation parties with their relatives and friends. He wasn't jealous. He had long since accepted the fact that he could no longer experience the familial warmth his classmates enjoyed. Still, it was on days like this that he missed his mum the most. With how busy he had been over the past year, Izuku hadn't visited her lately, even on her last death anniversary. Making a quick decision, Izuku turned towards the cemetery instead of his foster home. A train ride later, Izuku was standing in front of his mum's cremation niche. With the ever-increasing population and need for land in the city, a traditional grave was something only the wealthy could afford. With meager savings and an underage son as the next of kin, Midoryia Izuku was only afforded an impersonal niche in the government mausoleum. Auntie Mitsuki had arranged and paid for the funeral, but she hadn't seen much point in having a more personalized grave, since memories were more important than wherever the F you put the dead. Izuku disagreed. When they placed Mum's urn into the niche and sealed it with the stone slab containing her photo and name, Izuku had cried, imagining his mum trapped within four walls for the rest of eternity. He had wanted to scatter her ashes in the country park they used to visit, but he had been too young to make that decision. Izuku placed down his school bag and notebooks. He sat on the floor so that he was eye level with Mum's compartment, uncaring of the way his uniform became crumpled. "Hi, Mum," he murmured. "I'm sorry I haven't visited you for so long. So much has happened in this past year. After all these years, I finally found my quirk, and I got into UA. I know you've always thought being a hero is dangerous, but you don't have to worry about me with my quirk. I won't be dying from hero work anytime soon." He paused. "But I guess I can't join you soon either, so we'll have to be patient. Can I actually die of old age?" Izuku shook his head. "Doesn't matter. I graduated from middle school this afternoon, and I'll start at UA High after spring break about a week and a half later. I've already made a new friend in the heroics course, and Kacchan's going there as well. I wonder what my classmates will be like." He smiled slightly. "I'm sad that you won't be here physically with me, but you'll always be with me in spirit, right? This will be a new beginning for me. And maybe it's just another dream of a Deku, but I hope it will be the beginning of something amazing." Izuku couldn't decide if his first day at UA arrived too soon or not soon enough. At any rate, he was incredibly nervous. His stomach was doing jumping jacks and his sweat glands were determined to take a page out of his tear ducts, which SCKD because he wanted his new uniform to be in pristine condition for a while longer. "Don't ruin your clothes, brat," his foster mother had grumbled. "I'm not paying for anything more. At least your schooling will be free." To his gratitude, he didn't bump into Kacchan on the way to school. He did bump into Uraraka. She gave him a curious glance for the stack of notebooks in his arms, but graciously accepted his deflections and began talking his ear off about what they should expect. Was this how people felt when he used to mutter in their general direction? Izuku didn't think it was as bad as people had complained. He made sure to be attentive to Uraraka's rambling. It turned out Uraraka was in Class 1A, which made his stomach calm down a little. Now, if only Kacchan wasn't in his class as well. Too soon, they were standing in front of Class 1A's giant door. Izuku swallowed. The door was so huge. Abruptly, he had the same feeling of inadequacy he had felt on the day of the entrance exam when he was staring at the gates to UA. The only silver lining on both occasions was Uraraka's supportive presence. Uraraka took a deep breath. Composing herself, she pushed the door open. Oh no! Kacchan was here. Izuku's hope vaporized with the force and explosion. Seeing the explosive blonde, Uraraka puffed up and growled. At the same time, Kacchan's contemptuous eyes met theirs. He stood up and prowled to their position. Simultaneously, Kacchan snarled, "Deh!" as Uraraka interrupted, "Don't you dare!" Izuku paled, instinctively curling around his stack of notebooks. He hadn't known Uraraka for that long, but in that short PRD of time, he had never once seen her worked up about anything. Suddenly, he felt like a rabbit stuck in a cage with two wolves fighting over him. They were going to fight and get expelled all on the first day because of Izuku. He couldn't allow that to happen, but what could he? As if unable to sense the palpable tension in the air, or perhaps in spite of it, a tall, dark-haired boy stepped between Kacchan and Uraraka. Izuku stared. Did he have a death wish? The boy bowed in greeting and introduced himself as Ida Tenya, then loudly congratulated Izuku for realizing the secret parameters of the practical exam. Izuku blushed. He shrank into himself. The entire class was staring at him instead of Kacchan and Uraraka now. Did none of them know about the rescue points? It was out there for anyone who wanted to do research. Besides, he would have stopped to help Uraraka and the other candidates even without the rescue points. Ruined clothing bedmed. Thanks? At least Uraraka and Kacchan seemed to have forgotten about their death match via glaring for the moment. Back hunched, Izuku stumbled to a seat far away from Kacchan, placing his notebooks beneath his chair and hanging his school bag on the back of the chair. Uraraka followed after another vicious glare at the explosive boy. He didn't relax until his new classmates' attention drifted from him. They were doing a Quirk apprehension test. That was not good. How was Izuku supposed to show off his Quirk through physical tests? Retake the test until he got a good score? To make matters worse, their new teacher had threatened to expel the one who scored last place, which wasn't fair to anyone with less training, but Izuku had expected the heroics course to be harsh and unfair. Even with all his training, Izuku doubted he could beat his classmates, who must have been training for much longer than him. Right now, Izuku's only choice was to complete the test quirkless and retake it until he wasn't expelled. At least he got to meet Eraserhead, an underground hero who was only mentioned in the dark recesses of the internet. He'd certainly fanboy if not for the threat of expulsion. Kacchan had certainly made a brilliant impression, what with the giant explosion and the impressive softball throw results. It didn't stop Uraraka from scowling at him. Izuku whispered frantically, "You don't have to hate him on my behalf." Uraraka pouted, "But he was a JRK to you." Was she still hung up over what happened on the day of the entrance exam? He had thought he did a good job of dismissing that incident. That's just how Kacchan behaves. Izuku protested. Well, it shouldn't be how he behaves. It's not an attitude a hero should have, and I saw him, he was harassing you, not just being a JRK. So I won't like him until he proves he's not as much of an but as I think he is. So yes, Kacchan was harassing him, but it was just something that happened. It was simply part of their dynamic. As much as Uraraka's concern made his chest flutter with warmth, Kacchan's attitude was not something she had to be worked up over. As Izuku pondered how to make Uraraka understand this, Aizawa-sensei interrupted. "If you're done whispering, it's your turn." Izuku gulped. Shockingly, Izuku didn't place last. Well, not exactly. He tied for last place with Mineta Minoru, a student with purple orbs of hair. Mineta's quirk was really interesting, something Izuku would love to analyze when he was alone, but something about his attitude made Izuku's skin crawl in a way Kacchan's attitude didn't. To be honest, he had done better than he expected, not enough to avoid expulsion, unfortunately, but he still did well. It must have something to do with developing his strength, speed, and stamina rather than focusing on bodybuilding like he had originally planned to. Next to Izuku, Mineta was bawling his eyes out. "Why aren't you crying? We're gonna be expelled." Izuku shrugged, not wanting to explain his quirk at the moment. Somehow, that made Mineta cry harder. Considering Izuku's previous tendency to cry at the slightest provocation, he was rather impressed. And then Aizawa-sensei explained no one would be expelled. Apparently, the threat was a logical ruse to push everyone to take the test seriously. Izuku breathed out. Mineta sniffled. Uraraka gave him a relieved smile. Had she been worried for him? And patted his shoulder. He wouldn't have to die today. Since it was just a half day, Izuku's first day at UA passed quickly after the quirk apprehension test. Aizawa-sensei had Ida pass out school supplies, brown exercise books, lined paper, graph paper, and the rest while he slipped back into his yellow sleeping bag and closed his eyes. The next morning, they had normal high school lessons, something ordinary except for the fact all the teachers were pro-heroes. There was something admirable about their decision to earn a teaching license on top of their hero license, and their choice to become a teacher while already working a hard and dangerous job. Izuku sat quietly and copied notes as usual. And then it was lunch. Uraraka insisted Izuku should sit with her, so the two of them ended up at a table by the window, a bowl of katsudon and a shrimp tempura rice bowl in front of them. Uraraka sighed contently. "I'm so glad UA has a subsidized lunch scheme. The food here is the best." Izuku was inclined to agree. It had been so long since he ate katsudon. "It's so good," he sniffled. "I think I'm going to cry." "I'd say you're being dramatic, but," Uraraka shook her head, "I think I'm going to join you." "Excuse me, Karo," someone said. Izuku turned to see a girl with frog-like features behind him. She was in one, Azu, something, right? "Can I sit here?" "Azui," Uraraka exclaimed. "Of course. Call me Tsuyu," the green-haired girl said as she settled in the seat opposite of Uraraka. "Tsuyu, your performance in yesterday's test was amazing. The long jump was so impressive." Azui Tsuyu's cheeks turned greener, as if she was blushing. "You got a higher score than me, Karo." Weren't frogs blood red? But it would be rude to ask her that. Izuku ate his lunch quietly as the girls chatted. Something in his stomach twisted at how friendlily Uraraka treated Azui Tsuyu. It didn't make sense. Of course Uraraka's friendly nature would extend beyond him. Izuku was just one of her many friends. He didn't even know her for that long. He must have been truly spoiled by the thrill of having a friend. Then, Azui Tsuyu asked, "Excuse me for being blunt, but what's with the animosity between you and Bakugo?" Izuku choked. Uraraka frowned. "Bakugo? Who Midoryia?" Tsuyu handed him a napkin. After coughing to dispel the noodle lodged in his throat, Izuku gasped, I'm okay, and she means Kacchan." "Oh." Uraraka wrinkled her nose. Should have guessed he'd have a name like that. "Here, drink this." She handed Izuku her cup of water, which he gratefully accepted, then turned to Tsuyu. "Bakugo's a JRK, that's why. The first time I met him, he was harassing Midoryia. I had to get Midoryia away to make Bakugo stop." She slung an arm around Izuku's shoulder. "And see this precious bean? He refuses to protect himself, so I have to protect him." Izuku carefully set the cup of water back onto the table, then hissed, face flaming, "Uraraka." Tsuyu nodded seriously. "I see. I'll have to see for myself before I pass any judgment, but if that's the case, I understand why you dislike him." Izuku groaned. "He's fine, seriously. That's how Kacchan talks with everyone. He's brave and determined and powerful. He'll become a brilliant hero." "If you say so," Uraraka said unbelievingly. "Now, are you going to eat your katsudon or can I have it?" Izuku shrieked and began shoveling noodles into his mouth. All Might was nervous, a fact that would make journalists shriek in excitement. But that was the truth. He had no experience with teaching children. The longest he had interacted with kids was for a few hours, during charity events. All he had to do then was amaze them, which was easy enough. But that didn't hold a candle to teaching teenagers to become heroes. It would just be like taking on sidekicks or interns, but even less experienced, right? Except All Might had never taken on interns, and he had been reliably informed Sir Night-Eye, his one and only sidekick, had been hyper-competent for someone with his level of experience. Ever since he joined UA's faculty, he had seen some of his new colleagues side-eyeing him. Eraserhead, an underground hero All Might only knew from Neo Mace's frequent complaints of his sleeping habits, seemed especially doubtful of All Might's teaching ability. None of the teachers were blinded by his shiny #1 placement once they got over the shock of All Might teaching at UA, which his entire purpose was to be a larger-than-life symbol, so it wasn't good, was it? But giving credit through merit instead of status, that was a rare virtue. Maybe it was because they knew about his injury. Still, the doubt about his teaching ability was fair. All Might doubted his teaching ability himself. It wouldn't do much good to keep ruminating on it, though. He glanced at the clock. It was time. Katsuki felt restless. For the whole morning, the class had normal high school lessons. While the heroes were much better teachers than those diamond pushovers at Aldra Middle School, he had hoped the lessons would be more exciting, unique, something special and brilliant befitting UA's heroic course. Not that he would do anything but excel either way. Finally, after a grueling lunch PRD in which a bunch of sickeningly friendly extras corralled him into dining with them, it was time for Heroic's foundation. Katsuki slouched in his seat, carefully maintaining his bored facade. Beside him, Shitty Hair kept trying to include him in a conversation. Katsuki would have yelled at him if he wasn't so FNG hot. This was just an admission that he had FNG eyes. It didn't mean anything. Not that he'd ever let anyone know either way. The bell rang. 1 minute passed. Then 2 minutes. 3. Katsuki shifted in his seat. Where was the teacher? He blinked. All Might was standing on the podium. Why the f is All Might? Holy shit. All Might, the most powerful hero in the world and his inspiration, was teaching him. Katsuki couldn't help but sit up straight like an obedient teacher's pet. All Might was teaching him. He'd leave all these extras in the dust, show that he's the best of the best, prove to All Might that he and he alone was worthy of the hero's attention. Almost subconsciously, Katsuki felt Deku perk up. That single act drowned his enthusiasm. Katsuki gritted his teeth. After introductions, All Might explained they were doing a battle simulation exercise. Brilliant. Katsuki grinned, his teeth bared. He was going to dominate the field and show All Might he was the strongest in the entire class. And if he was paired up with Deku so that he could finally get some FING answers out of that DMN piece of sheet and remind him of his place, then his day might just be perfect. Izuku changed quickly, not wanting to keep All Might waiting. His teal costume was a redesigned version of the one he drew with his mum, with All Might's signature bangs sewn onto the hood and an illustration of his smile on his mouthguard. The locket containing the cyanide pill was hidden beneath his suit. He was glad he chose the cyanide pill as an alternate option for activating his quirk. Even though his suit wasn't blade-proof, a simple pocket knife would have a hard time cutting through the reinforced material. Surprisingly, he was the first one to get changed. He went out to the waiting area and All Might smiled at him. Young Midoryia, I'm glad you made it into you. Izuku stared. Did he? You remember me? All Might beamed, which didn't mean much, because he was always beaming. Of course I do. Our encounter was such a memorable experience. I would be a poor hero if I didn't remember you. Izuku spluttered. It wasn't All Might had just done his job. Izuku had cried on him, but as embarrassing as that was, it wouldn't make the encounter memorable. All Might inspired plenty of people to become heroes, so it wasn't his encouragement that was memorable either. Was it because Izuku forced All Might to reveal his injured form? That must be it. But Izuku didn't want his hero to remember him for something like that, something as terrible as forcing his hero to reveal his deepest, darkest secret. Before he could come up with an appropriate response, the other students streamed in. The lesson began. They were doing a simple battle simulation exercise to gauge everyone's strengths and limits in combat. The class was randomly separated into teams of 2. Izuku was paired with Tokoyami Fumikage, a boy with the head of a bird. He had seen a shadow peek out from Tokoyami's body and talk to the people around him then? Possibly a sentient quirk, which was nearly as rare as being quirkless. Izuku's hands itched to scratch down his observations of Tokoyami's quirk. Later, when he was alone, All Might then explained the villain team would be tasked with hiding and protecting a papier-mâché bomb in a building, while the hero team's job was to either capture the opposing team's members or to touch the bomb. After elaborating on the rules, All Might assigned the hero and villain teams. Izuku's team, Team A, was a hero team. Their opposing team was Team D. Kacchan was on Team D. The first time Ochako saw Midoriya, she saw someone who needed saving. The green-haired boy was short and lanky, with pale skin, deep eye bags and worn-down clothes. Maybe it had something to do with his appearance, but the scene reminded her of the many times she saw the homeless people in her neighborhood being harassed by assholes. So she had done what she always did: she got the boy away from his harasser. And if she had taken vindictive pleasure in elbowing the blonde harder than strictly necessary? Well, that was nobody's business. The green-haired boy, who turned out to have the fitting name of Midoryia, had been very enthusiastic. Ochako had been certain he could pass the written, but with how sickly he looked, she hadn't really thought he could pass the practical. But then looks were deceiving. Midoryia had rescued her from the zero-pointer, the two became friends, and the rest was history. Ochako hadn't felt so strongly over Bakugo. At first he was just one JRK among many, but as she got to know Midoryia more, her protective instincts over him increased. Her intense dislike over Bakugo did as well. Her friends in middle school had called her the mum friend, something about her protective instincts akin to a mother's. All that was to say, she was not happy with the arrangement of this training exercise. Midoryia shouldn't face Bakugo, especially after the vindicated and victorious expression on Bakugo's face once the group pairings was announced. It seemed to announce, "I finally get an excuse to beat Midoryia up without repercussions. Mwahaha." This training exercise would result in disaster. She could feel it down to the marrow of her bones. Ochako bit her lips. Midoryia was far from helpless. His actions in the entrance exam proved that much. But he condoned Bakugo's actions, all the while Bakugo seeked to hurt him. Should she tell All Might to change the group pairing? Bakugo was certainly out to get Midoryia, but surely All Might would prevent anything from getting out of hand? No, it was better safe than sorry. Quietly, she walked to All Might's side. All Might, sir? Can you change the group pairings? Midoryia is facing Bakugo, and I'm not sure. All Might smiled at her. Young Uraraka. In real-life situations, heroes can't decide whom they fight. It is only fair that this exercise simulates real life. So no, I can't change the pairing. I know, but All Might was All Might, he couldn't be wrong, but Bakugo hates Midoryia, and Midoryia thinks it's acceptable, he won't defend himself. Young Uraraka, All Might interrupted, it is admirable that you are worried for your friend. But this is only a simulation. If anything untoward happens, I am here to stop the match. Focus on your own match and leave the worrying to me, all right? Ochako nodded. She just had to trust All Might. She hoped she was making the right decision. Izuku took a deep breath. There's no point in panicking about his inevitable confrontation with Kacchan. He just wished it wasn't during the first heroics class. He knew he'd regret putting off their conversation. If only he'd. Midoryia. Tokoyami said solemnly. What dark thoughts have overtaken your mind? They only had a few minutes to come up with a plan to survive Kacchan and optimistically to win the exercise. He had to focus. He shook his head, pasting on a shaking smile. It's nothing. Do you mind if you tell me about your quirk? He braced himself. No one liked the quirkless Deku asking after their quirk. But it had to be done if they were to make a plan that could withstand Kacchan. Luckily, Tokoyami simply considered him for a moment before the shadow from before rose out of his body again. Hi! The shadow exclaimed. I am Dark Shadow. He/they pronouns. I'm really good at fighting. Are you our partner? What's your name? Izuku was right. The aptly named Dark Shadow was sentient. They were very enthusiastic. Hi. I'm Midoryia Izuku. He/him pronouns. It's nice to meet you. Dark Shadow, for lack of a better description, squealed, I like him, Fumikage. Can we keep him? Tokoyami sighed a long-suffering sigh. Dark Shadow, we've talked about this before. We cannot keep humans. Izuku couldn't help but giggle. Then, the reason they were talking hit him like a truck. His grin fell away. Noting his suddenly somber expression, Tokoyami asked, "What is your quirk, Midoryia? We'll have to use all of our abilities if we are to show our worth as heroes." Izuku shifted, "I can manipulate time." Tokoyami frowned at the vague answer but didn't press any further. Okay, so their opponent, the one other than Kacchan, was Kirishima, the boy with spiky red hair. Izuku remembered him showing off his quirk during recess. Kirishima's quirk is hardening. He can harden his skin. He's a bad matchup against you and Dark Shadow, since you and Dark Shadow can attack Kirishima at range but he can't. And, you should know that Kacchan Bakugo, doesn't quite like me. Kirishima'll probably be guarding the bomb, since Kacchan Bakugo is definitely going after me. So you two can go find the bomb while I distract him? 2 pairs of eyes are definitely better than 1. And if you tell me which rooms are empty over the earpiece, you won't have to search those rooms again if I have to use my quirk, but we'll have to memorize the blueprints. He paused. Basically, you and Dark Shadow will go find the bomb while I distract Kacchan. You can tell me which rooms are empty so that you won't have to search them again when I use my quirk. We'll have to memorize the blueprints, but that's viable. He had dictated his plan like Tokoyami would agree to it, no questions asked. He tugged at the sleeves of his hero costume nervously. You're okay with this plan, right? If you have a better idea, we should definitely go with it. We don't have to follow my plan. This is just the best strategy one can come up. Tokoyami shook his head. No, you know Bakugo the best. We'll go with your plan. Dark Shadow nodded. What he said. Okay. Izuku took a deep breath. We can do this. Probably. Izuku was an idiot. He had been running around the building, always on the opposite sides of where Tokoyami and Dark Shadow were searching. He ducked around a corner, away from where he heard loud noises, into the waiting arms of Kacchan. One thing about Kacchan was that he was deceptively smart, even though his entire image screamed, delinquent who didn't give a DMN. He always got higher grades than Izuku, and he was very good at strategizing. The latter of which was evident now. Izuku had been using the loud noises Kacchan made to evade him. He must have figured that out and used it against Izuku. Izuku cursed silently. Deku! Kacchan roared across the corridor. You can't run now. He was right. Izuku couldn't outpace him, especially with Kacchan's new rocket mobility technique. Could he get the cyanide pill into his mouth before Kacchan reached him? Probably not. Damn it. When flight wasn't an option, he could only fight. As always, Kacchan opened with a right hook. Izuku ducked, using Kacchan's momentum to put some distance between them. Suddenly all high and mighty now that you got into you, Kacchan growled. How did you cheat to get in, you quirkless fucker? Suddenly, Izuku was struck with a stupid idea, one that might just buy him enough time to run away. I'm not quirkless, he said. Predictably, Kacchan froze. What? Izuku began backing away. I'm not quirkless, Kacchan. That's how I got into UA. Kacchan snarled. So you've been hiding a quirk this whole huh? You think your shiny new quirk will save you from this? But he had hoped that would buy him more time. Kacchan raised his hand. Izuku flinched, bracing himself for a larger-than-usual explosion. That's not what happened. Kacchan pulled the pin from the gauntlet on his wrist. Izuku's eyes widened. A wall of fire and heat rushed towards him. He turned to run, but his legs were no match for the speed of an explosion. Heat nipped at his back, before the pressure caught up. The force of the explosion threw him onto the floor. And then, death by explosion hurt. Izuku's body ached with the phantom pain of searing heat and broken bones and shattered eardrums and scorched lungs. He limped through the hallways of the building, Kacchan hot on his heels. Rewind had never affected him this badly. Even drowning and seeing Uraraka die were better than this. He just had to keep going. Tokoyami had already cleared the lower 3 floors. They were getting close to finding the bomb. He could feel it. They were close to winning. All he had to do was survive Kacchan until then. He just had to be a little faster, a little stealthier. Dodge out of sight. Kacchan was just around the corner. It wasn't enough. It was never enough. Izuku leaned against the wall, his heart pounding in his chest. He should move. Kacchan was just around the corner. He was breathing too loudly. Heat, red, flames larger than normal tearing through his hero costume, an expanding pressure that threw him against the wall, the familiar pain of his ribs cracking. Kacchan had killed him again. Kacchan stepped around the corner. He bared his teeth, burning red eyes glittering with malice. Found you dead. Now, you are going to tell me exactly how a quirkless piece of shit like you cheated your way into UA. Izuku braced himself. It took another variation of the previous scenarios enough times that he had grown even more fearful of Kacchan's explosions and sincerely didn't want to have that conversation for real before Tokoyami whispered through the comms, "We've found the bomb. It's in the smallest room of the 5th floor." Thank Kami, Izuku thought, before the sound of explosions echoed outside the door of the room he was hiding in. Izuku flinched. Red heat fire screams and then no sound, boiling air attacking his lungs. Making an impromptu decision, he shoved the cyanide pill into his mouth. The bell rang, signaling the start of the exercise. Fumikage moved to enter the building through a window on the ground floor, while Midoriya would be entering through the front door, like they discussed. Wait. Midoriya breathed. Fumikage turned to see the green-haired boy sway unsteadily on his feet, skin pale and eyes wide. The bomb is in the smallest room on the 5th floor. How did he know? You used your quirk. The quirk that he didn't like to share with others. Fumikage understood the sentiment. Some people didn't react kindly to Dark Shadow's presence. It was why he preferred the safe blanket of darkness to the searing brightness of social interactions. Midoriya winced. Yeah. They must have done badly. Are you all right? You seem sick. Midoriya smiled shakily. I'm fine. It's just a side effect. Dark Shadow didn't come with any, except for singing while he was trying to fall asleep, or acting like an annoying little brother. Should we both go to where the bomb is? Held and attack Kirishima together? Midoriya nodded. There's a window connected to the room. If Dark Shadow can carry us up the window, we can bypass Kacchan. He turned to Dark Shadow. If you can't carry things that far, that's okay. We can take the stairs. Dark Shadow had never carried a human. They knew this. But Fumikage could feel they genuinely liked Midoriya. He treated them like a separate individual, something many people struggled with. It explained why Dark Shadow replied, I'm not sure. Yes, of course I can. Izuku nodded gratefully. Dark Shadow's excitement pulsed through their bond. Come on. We have a match to win. In the end, the conclusion of the match was almost anticlimactic. The two of them, three if one counted Dark Shadow, went around the building, stopping under the correct window. Carefully, Dark Shadow lifted Izuku onto the ledge, before lifting Tokoyami up as well. The windows of this particular building were tinted both ways. Izuku had checked. Once Tokoyami was settled and ready, Izuku cracked the window open with his pocket knife. Nothing that would be noticeable on the inside, if one wasn't focusing on the window. It seemed years of sneaking in and out of his room was finally paying off. In the blink of an eye, Dark Shadow shot into the room, dodged a surprised Kirishima, and firmly wrapped themselves around the bomb. Team A wins. Dark Shadow cackled. Kirishima gaped. Tension moved out of Tokoyami's shoulders. Before Izuku could fall off the ledge from shock, he opened the window fully and let the two of them inside. They had won. They had won. Izuku's plan had worked. Kirishima had been watching the door, had barely had time to notice Dark Shadow's intrusion before they pounced onto the bomb. A perfect execution of his idea. Izuku didn't know he was capable of such a thing. It was nearly enough to bring a genuine smile back to his lips. A furious screech echoed through the building. Izuku flinched, good feelings vaporizing in the face of such fury. Now to deal with the fallout. Just as All Might remembered, UA had spared no expenses when designing the battlegrounds. In the observation room, he could view the two teams from the numerous cameras positioned around the building. The earpieces allowed him to hear their conversations as well. Team D wasn't working together. It was such a pity. Young Kirishima's hardening could possibly withstand young Bakugo's explosions. Their quirks complemented each other. They would have worked well together. All Might made a note to remind them of that. Team A, on the other hand, were discussing a plan and analyzing the blueprints. They appeared to be getting along well. Making allies would be an essential skill on the field. Young Midoryia, especially, seemed to be doing well. When they first met, he was just a scrawny, trembling boy who just had his life turned upside down. Now, he was still as scrawny, but he appeared more confident in himself, less terrified. All Might could recall his first encounter with the boy clearly, mostly because of the exposure of his secret, but also because of the boy's powerful quirk. If he learned to utilize it well, he'd become a powerful hero. Even if he failed, the fact All Might's secret still hasn't made its way to the internet spoke highly of the boy's morals. The bell rang, signifying the start of the simulation. All Might sat back and watched. Young Midoryia was backing away from young Bakugo. "I'm not quirkless, Kacchan. That's how I got into UA." All Might felt his gut clench. Something was going to go wrong. He stood up and pressed the button that allowed him to speak directly to young Bakugo's earpiece. "Young Bakugo, whatever you do, don't." Young Bakugo snarled, ignoring him. "So you've been hiding a quirk this whole effing time, huh? You think your shiny new quirk will save you from this?" He raised his hand. All Might's heart sank. It was a mistake to allow the gauntlets for a simple class exercise. He rushed out of the observation room, but even All Might was no match for the speed of an explosion. The sound of explosions echoed through his earpiece, before it shorted out into static. And then, All Might ran out of the observation room, his injury raging in protest like always. Commend him for using so much of his quirk that morning. His reserves were already running dangerously low for teaching an afternoon of classes, but he'd reveal his secret if it meant saving young Midoryia. What was the point of a symbol who couldn't even save a single child? Young Midoryia looked obviously sick. The green-haired boy leant against the wall, face pale and taking shaky breaths. Something was wrong. Young Bakugo arrived, bringing with him explosions and a cruel smile. Wrong, wrong, wrong. All Might didn't survive as long as he did by not listening to his gut. He called off the match. He should have known that tenacious children rarely did as they're told. Guilt. It was a sensation All Might was familiar with. Nana's death, how long it took to defeat All for One, his falling out with Mirai, and now. He should have listened to young Uraraka. Ochako was practically jumping out of her skin with nerves. There was only 1 minute until Midoriya's match began, and then he'd be facing Bakugo. She knew All Might had promised he'd be on the lookout for the entire match, that nothing too dangerous would happen, that the match would progress smoothly with no permanent harm done to anyone, but the unsettling weight in her stomach told her otherwise. In another timeline, she would have been right. This was stupid. Midoryia was a capable hero student too, not just a weak boy she had to protect. She should focus on her own match, let All Might worry about Midoryia. She couldn't. "What's bothering you, Karo?" Uraraka jumped. She spun around. "Oh, it was just Tsuyu." The two had clicked quite well during the lunch party. "Hi." She managed a weak smile. "It's just, Midoriya's facing Bakugo, and I know All Might's here to stop anything bad from happening, but I'm worried." She finished lamely. Tsuyu nodded thoughtfully. "You remind me of an older sister, Karo. Sometimes we worry about our younger siblings and we feel terrible when they're in trouble, but we can't just wrap them up with bubble wrap. You have to believe in Midoryia. He's a capable person too." "I know," Ochako sighed, ignoring the implication that she had accidentally adopted a boy she only met a few weeks prior like a pro. "My brain's just being very unreasonable." "Brains do that sometimes, Karo." Tsuyu agreed. Ochako snorted softly. The match began. Bakugo immediately stormed off, leaving Kirishima behind. Ochako scowled. Another screen showed Midoryia and Tokoyami standing in front of the entrance, unmoving. What were they planning? Did they somehow miss the opening bell? Excited chatter arose around the room. Ochako wringed her hands anxiously. Then, Midoryia and Tokoyami moved to a specific spot outside the building. As their classmates watched on, astonished, a shadow grew out of Tokoyami's body and helped them onto a ledge on the 5th floor. Excuse her language, but what the F dash? In the next minute, the match was over, with zero contact with the explosive blonde. Ochako released a breath she didn't know she was holding. That had gone suspiciously well. Izuku could barely make out All Might's command to return to the observation room over Kacchan's unhinged scream. Kirishima blinked, vaguely unsettled by Kacchan's behavior. Tokoyami made a displeased noise. The madness of defeat has sunken its claws into him. Izuku ignored them. He had to leave the crime scene. Dark Shadow, can we please go back through the window? I really don't want to deal with. He waved his hand at the door. That? Dark Shadow gave an exaggerated bow. Welcome aboard the Dark Shadow vertical taxi ride. They curled their body around Izuku and lifted him out of the window. Despite his nerves, Izuku waved at the gobsmacked Kirishima. Nice match bye. He gave a nervous chuckle. Dude, you can't just leave us like that. Kirishima responded a second too slow. That's so unmanly. Izuku grimaced and did not reply. Dark Shadow had barely retreated back to the 5th floor when the sound of outrage drew close. Kacchan stuck his head out of the window and screamed, ignoring Kirishima's shouts of how unmanly he was acting. Deku, you coward. Get your effing butt back here so that I can beat you up. Izuku flinched, the deafening sound of explosions echoing in his mind. He felt guilty for abandoning Tokoyami, but he couldn't stay here. Forcing his breaths to even out, he gathered up the last of his wits and shouted back. Thanks for the ride, Dark Shadow. See you back at the observation room. With that he bolted. Izuku thanked whatever deity who gave him his quirk. Kacchan didn't jump out of the building after him. Izuku was breathing hard by the time he got to the observation room. He didn't think he had run as hard even yesterday, with the threat of expulsion over his head. His classmates welcomed him back with cheers and excited chatter. Uraraka gave him a thumbs up, a strange expression on her face. She didn't seem upset, at least. Dude, Midoryia, that was awesome. How did you know where the bomb was hidden? Dang, the match was so short. Where's all the action? What's up with you and Bakugo? Dude, I don't blame you for jumping out of the window. Bakugo looks mad. Uraraka snorted, more like unhinged. I must protest the usage of such language in relation to our classmates. That being said, Bakugo's reaction was very inappropriate. Did you find where the bomb is with your quirk? Yeah. I don't think we've actually seen it during the quirk apprehension test. What's your quirk, actually? Precognition? Izuku shrugged. It was so weird that they were all interested in him. The attention made his skin crawl. If it was up to him, he would have hidden in a closet for the rest of the day. He shifted uncomfortably. Still, this was better than Kacchan. Something like that. That set off a fresh wave of comments. Seriously? That's so cool, man. It's so boring. How are you supposed to get the girls with a quirk like that? It's not like any girl would want to be with you, anyway. Yeah, Mineta, I wouldn't date you even if you're the last man in the world. Deku! The sound of explosions shut up his classmates better than any teacher could. Kacchan stomped into the room, thankfully keeping the explosions to a minimum. Deku, you can't run away now. Izuku's breath hitched. His heartbeat quickened, jumping until it felt more like the heartbeat of a rabbit than that of a human. His mouth was very dry. Dude, who are you calling a Deku? Izuku blinked. Kacchan drew back, as if shocked anyone would talk back to him. That is most inappropriate conduct unbefitting of a hero student. Yeah. No one likes sore losers. Kacchan scowled. Extras. I'm not talking to you. Dude, that's so unmanly. That voice came from behind. It seemed that Tokoyami and Kirishima had caught up. If you want to talk to Midoryia, Uraraka growled, shifting into what looked like a fighting stance, you'll have to go through me, you overgrown Pomeranian. Since when had Uraraka moved in front of Izuku? What the F, did you call me round cheeks? You go, Uraraka. Someone hollered. Before an actual fight could break out, All Might inserted himself between Kacchan and Uraraka. Izuku couldn't believe he had actually forgotten All Might was in the room. Young Bakugo, young Uraraka, while I appreciate your enthusiasm, there is a time and place for it. Young Bakugo, I understand defeat may be hard, but it is an unavoidable part of heroics. You are here to learn how to improve so that it may occur less often. Kacchan huffed, but he seemed somewhat less violent than a moment ago, so there was that. Young Uraraka, trying to protect your friend is very admirable, but that does not mean you can fight your classmates outside of training exercises. Uraraka stared unrepentantly at All Might, but did not argue the point. I'll further discuss this incident with you later. Young Bakugo, you are free to go for a walk and join us when you calm down. Now, let us return to our lesson. Kacchan scowled. Uraraka glared at Kacchan, her hands still positioned in front of her. Everyone in the room held their breath as, grunting, Kacchan stormed out of the door. The pause. Then too. Kacchan didn't return. People breathed a collective sigh of relief as the tension drained out of the room. Then, All Might cleared his throat and began discussing the previous exercise. The lesson resumed. Izuku's heart was finally calming down, but it was still hard to focus on All Might. From what he gathered, All Might was congratulating Tokoyami and Izuku's clever use of their quirks, while comforting a despondent Kirishima. The rest of the class stared at Izuku curiously, most likely because All Might didn't actually explain his quirk. The staring was enough to make him duck his head down. As the attention shifted to the next pair of groups, Izuku felt a hand squeeze his. He tensed, but relaxed when he saw it was Uraraka, a tentative smile on her face. You okay? She murmured. Izuku suddenly felt hyper-aware of how clammy his palms were. Instead of answering the obvious he was not okay, he whispered back, overgrown Pomeranian? What? Uraraka protested quietly. If the Pomeranian is gonna call you by that ridiculous nickname, Deku, then I get to call him whatever I want. Izuku smiled shakily. He'd never get used to having such a good friend who'd stand up for him or a good teacher, for the matter. He still wasn't okay. A few simple words couldn't fix the predicament that was Kacchan, not even words from All Might. But as long as she was there, Uraraka's smile could temporarily drown out the memory of Kacchan's explosions. He held onto Uraraka's hand like a drowning man onto driftwood. That night, a frantic Ochako called her parents. Living alone would be a daunting task for any 15-year-old, but it was especially true for Ochako, who had never spent a night away from her parents since they brought her back from the hospital. To alleviate her homesickness, she video-called her parents every single night. She was rarely this frantic, though. No, something big had happened today. Something like a truth she had been ignoring for the better part of the afternoon finally registering in her brain. The moment the call connected, Ochako blurted, "Mum, Dad, you have to help me. I think I accidentally adopted my classmate." Her parents paused, blinked. Ochako's screen was practically frozen as they processed what they had just heard. Then her dad burst out laughing. Ochako blushed, the pink spots on her cheeks brightening. "Dad, this isn't funny." Her mum gave a fond but exasperated sigh. "Ignore him, Ochako. We're just surprised. Your dad's prepared a shovel talk for your crush, not someone you, adopted. I'm not sure you're old enough to have children, though." Ochako didn't know it was possible, but her cheeks brightened even further. "It's not like that, Mum." "Really?" Mum raised her eyebrows. "Then tell us everything." Shota felt his familiar friend, headache, rear its ugly head. "You mean Bakugo attacked Midoryia? And you didn't stop him?" "Actually," Yagi corrected, "Bakugo called Midoryia a Deku, and his body language implied he wanted to fight Midoryia." Uraraka stepped between the two and said that Bakugo had to fight her before he could reach Midoryia. "I stopped them before things escalated." This was the debriefing session for Yagi's first lesson. Why Nedzu had to arrange for Yagi's first class to involve first years instead of the more mature third years, Shota had no idea. Maybe the rat just liked the chaos. It did make Shota's job harder, though. Normally, he'd personally fight the students to assess their capabilities when facing living opponents. It was easier to grasp what they were good at and what needed special attention, and safer than pitting volatile, untrained teenagers against each other. Now, all he had to go on were videos from the afternoon's matches, as well as Yagi's observations. Great. He pinched the bridge of his nose. "I'll have to talk to them tomorrow. Anything else?" Yagi continued, "Bakugo and Todoroki are especially allergic to teaming up with others. The next morning, Shota was forced to abandon his sleeping bag for a slightly more important task. Okay, do self-study or whatever. Shota grumbled as he began homeroom. Uraraka, come with me. Uraraka's eyes widened. Shota stalked out of the classroom, reluctantly leaving his sleeping bag behind. Uraraka followed him like a prisoner following their executor to the gallows. Kemi. Being a responsible teacher SCKD. Shota wondered briefly if he should tell her she wasn't in trouble. No, the fear would encourage her to cooperate. In the hallway, Shota turned to Uraraka. She was standing with her head bowed slightly, nervously twiddling with her thumbs. All Might told me you threatened to fight Bakugo Katsuki during the training exercise yesterday. He stated, that is strictly forbidden outside of training. A flash of confusion passed through Uraraka's face. Bakugo's name isn't? She shook her head. Instead of curling into herself, Uraraka straightened, determination shining in her eyes. Interesting. Aizawa-sensei, Bakugo was threatening Midoryia. I had to interfere. She tilted her head upwards, fist clenched. I don't regret it. I accept whatever punishment you give me, but if that happened again, I'd still do what I did. All Might was there to handle things if they escalated. Shota raised his eyebrows. Don't you trust him? Uraraka blinked. She blushed, looking down. Forgot. I was so angry at Bakugo and worried for Midoryia, I moved without thinking. All Might said you were angry beyond what Bakugo's words should have provoked, almost as if you two have a history. It was a statement, not a question. Uraraka affirmed it anyway. I first met Midoryia on the day of the entrance exam. Bakugo was harassing Midoryia. He was gripping Midoriya's arm hard, and Midoryia looked scared. But later, when I talked about Bakugo, Midoryia defended him. Uraraka scowled. And every other time me and Midoryia were in his presence, he'd start yelling at Midoryia, so that day definitely isn't a fluke. I know Midoryia is capable and not defenseless at all, but for some reason he just won't stand up against Bakugo. I don't want him to get hurt. Even if we weren't friends, what sort of hero would I be if I just stood by and watched someone get harassed? Great. Shota pinched the bridge of his nose. He almost wished Uraraka was simply volatile and looking for a fight. That would be simple. Then he could just expel the girl and be done with it. But from Uraraka's perspective, and he could tell from her passion that the girl was being genuine, she believed she had done the right thing. The heroic thing. If what she thought was true, it was what a hero should do, even if the way Uraraka did it was reckless and impulsive. Damn it, he couldn't punish her for this. Morals were hard enough to instill into the students, especially when half of his classes always consisted of overpowered brats and things didn't escalate enough to justify detention. I see. Shota finally said. Thank you for telling me. I'll look into this. Uraraka blinked, looking somewhat confused. She was probably expecting to be punished. Shota exhaled sharply. Just, next time, don't jump straight into a fight. He paused, glaring at the girl. Be glad things didn't escalate into a fight. You get off with a warning this time, but next time, I'm not one for second chances. He trailed off ominously. Uraraka swallowed. Yes, sensei. Aizawa nodded. Then get back inside. The next PRD is about to start. He opened the door to the classroom. The sound of soft chattering ceased immediately, with 19 faces turning back to their desks, pretending poorly to be studying. Uraraka returned to her seat to the tune of dead silence, well, almost. Kaminari, who apparently had no sense of self-preservation, shouted. You're not dead. Shota's eyes snapped to him, his quirk flaring. Kaminari snapped his mouth shut. He whimpered. Shota held his gaze for another second, before blinking. Bakugo, he said, see me at lunchtime. With that, he grabbed his sleeping bag and left the classroom, making his way back to the teacher's lounge. His next class wasn't until PRD2, so he had about 40 minutes to nap. Wait, no, he still hadn't finished marking the now second year's essays on property damage reparations, assigned over the spring break. Kemi. It was only 3 days into the first semester, and he was already ready for the school year to be over. Why did he ever choose to be a teacher? It wasn't until lunchtime that Uraraka confronted Izuku. Midoriya, she said, with a grin that emanated frustration. A knot of dread manifested in Izuku's gut. Yes? Izuku swallowed. Uraraka wouldn't hurt him, right? They were friends, but Kacchan always hurt him even though they were friends too. You never told me Bakugo's real name is Bakugo Katsuki. She said, I had to learn it from Aizawa-sensei. Izuku blinked. He never? Uraraka was mad about that? Sorry? I've been calling him Kacchan since we were children. I didn't think. Wait. Uraraka blinked. Kacchan is a childhood nickname? I thought, she shook her head. Yeah. We've been friends since we were born. Kacchan calls me Deku because it's an alternate reading of my name, and he didn't know how to pronounce it correctly when we were younger. Ooh, Uraraka scowled. I don't get it. Why do you still act like you're friends when that Pomeranian treats you like that? Because it wasn't Kacchan's fault that he thought Izuku was quirkless. He didn't ask to be treated like he could do no wrong. It wasn't his fault the teachers at Aldera never taught him restraint. Kacchan would become such a great hero once he got a chance to grow. Izuku didn't want to hinder his development into a great hero in any way. Before Izuku could even try to explain the history behind Kacchan and him, though, Tsuyu arrived. She blinked at the pair of friends as she sat down, then asked bluntly, What happened, Karo? You look tense. Uraraka opened her mouth, but Izuku beat her to it. I'm just wondering why Aizawa-sensei asked Uraraka to talk to him this morning. He exclaimed, sending Uraraka a pleading look. He didn't. He just didn't want to talk about this in front of anyone else. Actually, he didn't want to talk about it, PRD. Uraraka paused. Izuku kept looking at her, eyes wide and pleading. Tsuyu stared, unimpressed. Finally, Uraraka sighed. Sensei wanted to talk about what happened yesterday with Bakugo. She said, clearly unhappy. I see. Tsuyu nodded. You had a point when you said he's a JRK, Uraraka. I can see why you don't like Bakugo. I know, right? Uraraka grinned, vindicated. A shudder ran through Izuku's body. He could just feel she was about to launch into a Kacchan hate speech. What should he do? Hello, Midoryia Izuku, Uraraka. Someone said. Dark Shadow insisted I sit here. Izuku looked up, just in time to see Tokoyami slide into the seat next to Tsuyu. Thank Kami. Izuku was so happy that he could almost cry. He sniffled. Tokoyami sent him a look of concern. Call me Tsuyu. The frog Quirk girl said. Who's Dark Shadow? The shadow in question popped out of Tokoyami. Hi. I'm Dark Shadow. I'm Fumicage's Quirk. Use he/they pronouns with me. Oh, Uraraka smiled at the Quirk, but her smile looked more subdued than usual. I'm Uraraka Ochako. Really cool. Tsuyu nodded. It's nice to meet another person with an animal mutation, Karo. I am cool, aren't I? Dark Shadow preened. Fumicage, I like your friends. We're keeping them too. Tokoyami sighed fondly. Conversation moved onto safer topics. Uraraka kept sending looks of concern and mild frustration in Izuku's direction, but she didn't talk about anything related to Kacchan, which was all Izuku could hope for right now. He almost breathed a sigh of relief. Of course, that was when Yue's intruder alarm began to ring. It was lunch break, and Shota was spending it in an empty classroom instead of doing literally anything else. Because of the problem in front of him. Bakugo Katsuki. The student in question was slouched in the seat in front of Shota, an intense scowl on his face. Shota stared at him, unimpressed. Okay, he was a little impressed by Bakugo's unflinching attitude in the face of Shota's glaring, but it wasn't like he was trying too hard, so. Not that impressed. You attacked Midoriya after the training exercise yesterday. He finally said, head tilted. Ha! Bakugo scowled, but his back straightened. Is that what this is about? His lips curled into a sneer. Should have known. He muttered, but not softly enough that Shoyuta couldn't hear him. Deku always ruins everything. Bakugo! Shota said sharply. From that sentence alone, he could tell Bakugo and Midoriya had some sort of history. You should know that attacking a classmate outside of training is prohibited, especially unprovoked. And don't. Bakugo growled. Small sparks grew in his palms, emitting soft cracks that nevertheless sounded loud to an underground hero like Shota. Shota scowled, matching the expression on Bakugo's face. His eyes flashed red, immediately snuffing out the fledgling explosions in the student's hands. Bakugo didn't even flinch. Shota would have been impressed if not for the blatant lack of quirk control. It wasn't Iffingi unprovoked. The hero student snarled. Deku shouldn't have one. He's always been a creepy, useless piece of shit. I should have been the winner. I don't know how he cheated, but it's impossible. There's video proof that Midoryia won. Shota droned, already losing interest in the conversation. So Bakugo was another brat with more ego than skill. He had dealt with so many of those that he had already lost count. And regardless of who won, attacking or even trying to attack your classmate is unacceptable. Uraraka told me you harassed Midoryia before too. I hope I don't have to spell out what that means. Normally, when he said that, the criminal or student would either fess up and beg for mercy, or play the innocent angle and pretend they didn't know what was going on. Considering Bakugo's personality, it would be neither. The nerd deserved it. Bakugo scoffed. That was still a confession. He's always so creepy with his muttering and stalker notebooks. It really gets on my nerves. Shota frowned. He had seen those notebooks Midoryia carried around, but he had yet to hear any muttering from the quiet boy. And it isn't my fault Deku is so weak that he can't stand up for himself. If he wasn't so useless that he won't just stop crying and actually do something. Victim blaming at its finest. Bakugo! Shota interrupted sharply. The boy's words didn't make sense. Weak wasn't an adjective that could be used to describe Midoryia, even though the green-haired boy could definitely use more physical conditioning. Resourceful, determined, and helpful, maybe, but not weak or useless. Midoryia had more potential than Bakugo, that was for sure. He wasn't too concerned about Bakugo's view of Midoryia, though. Harassers tended to be biased against their victims. It was nothing out of the ordinary. Shota was more concerned that the blonde had learned to harass and victim blame someone so young. It didn't bode well for Bakugo's potential. Should he even go through his usual route of expelling and re-enrolling the student? Or would it be more beneficial to expel Bakugo PRD and send him to therapy? Someone who admitted to harassing others without guilt was not fit to be a hero. But could Bakugo change? Or, more accurately, would it be worth the resources allocated to make Bakugo change while keeping him in the heroics course? Before Shota could come to a conclusion, though, Yue's intruder alarm rang. The loud noise rammed into Shota's train of thought with the eloquence of a truck. The pro-hero stiffened. Someone had broken into Yue. Bakugo, he said again, standing up from his seat. Whether or not Bakugo was about to be expelled, right now, the student was still Shota's responsibility. Go to the bunkers in the basement. I have to go. He paused. But don't think this conversation is over. Without giving the explosive boy a chance to argue, Shota opened the door, one hand on his scarf, and sprinted away. Unbeknownst to them, a man with gray hair and flaking skin was rifling through Yue's lessons plans in the room next door. What a pity Aizawa Shota turned in the direction opposite to the teacher's lounge. If he had just chosen the path to his right instead of his left, he would have heard frustrated cursing echoing from the supposedly empty room. Yue's infiltrator wasn't exactly known for subtlety. As it was, an opportunity to avoid disaster was missed by a hair's breadth. Oh well, life couldn't be perfect. When Shota stumbled into his futon, it was 3:45. In the morning. The goddamn paparazzi break-in had wasted half of his afternoon, time that he should have been using to plan the third year's lessons. As one of the only teachers who didn't have any afternoon classes to teach yesterday, Nedzu had asked him to deal with the throng of bloodhounds at the gate. That DMN rat. He knew how much Shota hated dealing with reporters. They always mistook him for one of Yue's janitors because of how scruffy he looked. Yes, it was by design, but that didn't make the experience any less annoying. He started his evening patrol late because he had to catch up on lost time and finish the lesson plans. And then, the less said about his patrol, the better. Shota's back was going to be a mosaic of black and blue splotches tomorrow. Today. Because it was 4 in the FING morning. Shota groaned. He buried his face into his sorry excuse of a pillow, something he had gotten in a yard sale. He didn't even have time to decide whatever the F he was going to do with Bakugo. He'd deal with it tomorrow. After one, as first rescue training exercise. With that thought in mind, Shota closed his eyes and immediately fell asleep. The girl was trapped. Blood and tears trickled down her face, blending into a pink mess that flooded the ruined city. The city was silent. The city was too loud. There was no one around. Everyone was running for their lives. The buildings creaked ominously. The wind howled through the cracked window panes. The ground rumbled, sending a sharp jolt of pain through his bones. Something was coming. The girl looked up, right at him. Panic was painted all over her face. Something was coming, and it was about to catch her. No one heard her cries, resounding in the too empty, too full cityscape. No one but him. He ran towards the girl, one step after another. The distance between them stretched to infinity. A monster of steel and electricity appeared out of the void, towering over the girl. It was too late. He could not save her. He was W. The monster raised its leg. He could not stop it. He could not save her. He was not a hero. A resounding crack echoed in the empty space, the girl's dying scream bouncing off fallen walls of collapsed buildings. Red fluids and white fragments engulfed the city. He couldn't breathe, couldn't move, couldn't do anything. The girl was... Izuku woke up gasping for air. He had to go, save Uraraka, run. There were no do-overs because he was quirkless. His blanket tied him to the bed, swallowing him whole. No, who was stopping him from saving Uraraka? The 0-pointer was coming. She couldn't die. He couldn't lose the first person to be kind to him for so long. He couldn't lose family again. Izuku's breath hitched. He had fallen onto the floor. The pain jolted him from his thoughts. Izuku blinked. He was in Yue's fake city, his bedroom. The 0-pointer, a few All Might figurines and Mum's shrines stared down at him. It was terrifying, comforting. He was quirkless, had the ability to rewind time. He didn't saved Uraraka's life because he was worthless, useless, quirkless with his quirk. Uraraka was dead, alive and well because of him. She wasn't dead. She had texted him just before bed to ask about their English homework. Everything was fine. Uraraka was alive and Izuku had a quirk. He was living his childhood dream, and he wasn't even alone anymore. Uraraka liked him a lot for some reason, and Tokoyami and Tsuyu sat with them during lunch today. Izuku was the happiest he had been in a long time. But then, why was he having a nightmare? Izuku sniffled. His face was wet. Finally managing to untangle himself from his blanket, Izuku wiped frantically at his face. How long had it been since he last cried? Tears had seemed so pointless after some time. All they brought were scorn and hate. He could still remember Mum soothing him when he cried after nightmares, and it had been years. Damn it. Why was he suddenly thinking about this? Suddenly, the darkness of the room felt suffocating, like a force closing around his chest and crushing his ribs. Izuku stumbled towards the wall and slammed his fingers onto the light switch. White light flooded the small bedroom, but the suffocating feeling didn't fade. Izuku needed. Before his mind could catch up with his body, Izuku had grabbed his phone and dialed Uraraka's number. He stared at the device in his hand with mounting horror. It was 4:30 in the morning. He was going to wake Uraraka up. She'd be so annoyed that she wouldn't want to be Izuku's friends anymore, and he would be all alone again, and... Midoryia? Uraraka had picked up. It was too late to hang up and pretend nothing had happened. You're okay, Izuku breathed. Despite his embarrassment at waking Uraraka up, the freezing ice in his chest melted at the voice. She was fine, like Izuku had already known. This was so stupid. He should just tell her this was a mistake and let Uraraka go back to sleep. Midoryia? Uraraka said, voice growing increasingly panicked. Are you okay? Did you get hurt? Where are you? Do you need me to come over? I have my first aid kit, bleach if you need to hide a body, and if you need an alibi I totally have you covered. I'm fine. Izuku yelped. Look what he had done. He made Uraraka worried. I'm so sorry for waking you up. I had a nightmare and he wanted to hear her voice. Kemi. It sounded so stupid when he said that. Oh. Uraraka muttered. She laughed sheepishly. It's fine. I was already up anyway. Had a weird dream. She paused. You want to talk about it? Izuku hesitated. He really didn't want to talk about it. He didn't even want to think about it. But Uraraka had asked, and he was the one to call her, wasn't he? You don't have to tell me if you don't want to. The brunette added hurriedly, as if sensing Izuku's exact thoughts. We can just talk if you want. Izuku swallowed. He wanted to take her up on that offer, but Uraraka had already done so much for him by being his friend. He didn't want to monopolize her rest time too. No, thanks. I feel better already. He lied. You should go back to sleep. See you tomorrow. If you're sure. Uraraka said hesitantly. Good night, Midoryia. Good night. Izuku did not have a good night. No matter how much he wanted to, he could not bring himself to switch off the light and go back to sleep. He opened one of his notebooks at random and tried to read about Lightbreeze, a relatively unknown hero. The words swam on the page and did nothing to distract him from the cold climbing up his throat. Izuku gave up. Closing the notebook, he stared at the glowing letters on his alarm clock, an uneasy storm of wind and ice brewing beneath his chest. Morning couldn't come soon enough. Morning would bring things worse than his nightmare. Izuku had thought dawn would chase away the lingering ice in his chest. He was wrong. The sky outside was cloudy and gray, the air heavy with a humidity that weighed down Izuku's every move. He moved sluggishly through the kitchen and ended up burning breakfast for the first time in years. His foster mother yelled at him, of course. Izuku had to remake breakfast and left the apartment later than usual. The notebooks in his arms felt heavier than normal. He missed the train, barely making it to UA before the final bell rang. Thank Kami there were no reporters outside the gate today. It seemed the school had chased them all off after yesterday's break-in. Izuku didn't think he could deal with such a crowd right now. Izuku saw relief on Uraraka's as he entered the classroom. He swallowed the ice that threatened to engulf him, remembering Uraraka's pained scream that echoed in the ruined city. There wasn't enough left of her to even constitute a corpse. Aizawa-sensei appeared before Uraraka could speak to him. The hero frowned disapprovingly at Izuku, who hunched his back as he scurried to his seat. Was it just Izuku, or did Aizawa-sensei look more tired than the past 3 days? Aizawa-sensei told 1A to decide on a class president, before collapsing into his sleeping bag with a sigh. Half of the class immediately went off on a self-promotion campaign, but Izuku didn't join them. Even if his classmates decided he should become the class president as likely as a villain successfully attacking UA, he'd just screw up eventually. It was best to save everyone the trouble and not run for class president at all. Finally, Ida suggested they put things down to a vote. Izuku barely hesitated before writing down Uraraka Ochako. He smiled at the name on the small slip of paper. Uraraka was sweet, kind, and too good to be true, the friend Izuku had never thought he could have. She deserved the world, and if Izuku couldn't get her that, he could at least help her get the class presidency she wanted. And Uraraka did get the role. She beamed at the class from the podium, the 3 strikes under her name on the blackboard signifying her 3 votes. Next to her was Yaoyorozu, the newly dubbed vice president, who had 2 votes. On the opposite side of the classroom, Tsuyu blushed green under the intensity of Uraraka's smile. Kacchan didn't explode from the fact that he only got 1 vote, but Izuku could tell it was a close thing. His gritted teeth and clenched fists showed the explosive boy was exhibiting some rare restraint. Shockingly, Izuku also received 1 vote. He looked around the room in surprise, only to see Dark Shadow wink at him. Tokoyami was face-palming. If Izuku wasn't feeling so terrible, the gesture would have made him burst into tears of joy. As it was, It soothed an on-edge part of him, the animalistic being in his brain calming down momentarily at the gesture. He smiled back at Dark Shadow. It didn't last, of course. By lunchtime, the suffocating pressure in the air was back. "Are you okay?" Uraraka asked quietly as they walked towards the crowded cafeteria. The dark circles under her eyes matched his own. Guilt curdled in his gut at the sight. "I'm fine." Izuku smiled and immediately changed the topic. "Are you excited for the field trip this afternoon?" Uraraka frowned, but quickly smoothed her expression back into a smile. "Yeah. It's something about rescue training, right? I hope 13 will be there. They're such a great inspiration for me. I want to become a rescue hero like them, and their skill set is just so." She made a gesture with her hands that Izuku roughly translated to wow. Izuku's eyes lit up as he latched on to the familiar topic with all his might. "I know, right? The way they use their quirk is really creative. Most heroes with destructive quirks go into villain apprehension, but how 13 chooses to apply their quirk is so inspiring. I think." Uraraka nearly vibrated out of her skin in excitement once she realized 13 was indeed a part of one as field trip, which was apparently at an extravagant facility called USJ. "13's here," she hissed, squeezing Izuku's arm with her pinkies raised. "Oh my Kami, will it be weird if I ask for their autograph after class? I hope they'll demonstrate their techniques today. It'll so awesome to actually see their quirk in person." Izuku agreed. He had left his notebooks in his locker, and the lack of that familiar weight made his hands itch. He couldn't wait to write down everything from today's lesson. He saw 13 raise 3 fingers discreetly in Aizawa-sensei's direction, who was wearing an expression of annoyance. It looked right at home on a teacher's face. What was that about? Then, 13 began to talk about the hazards of poor quirk control. Uraraka listened, enthralled. At the edge of the crowd, Kacchan scoffed and rolled his eyes. At first, Izuku listened closely as well, but something felt wrong. The oppressive weight he had been feeling since last night returned with a vengeance, even with Uraraka squeezing his arm's blood circulation to a standstill next to him. The warm, humid air pressed down, crushing the air from his lungs. The vastness of the USJ felt too much, too unguarded. Like in his nightmare, the surroundings felt too silent and too loud simultaneously. Izuku shook his head. He was being stupid. This feeling was just a remnant of his nightmare. He had been feeling like this the entire day. Just because it had been pushed away temporarily by Uraraka's chattering didn't mean it was gone. And then, a swirling purple portal appeared in the middle of the central plaza.